The fog rolled in around 6, the way it always did in Ravenshore. I stood at my kitchen window, coffee going cold in my hands, and watched it swallow the harbor. First the water disappeared, then the boats, then the docks themselves, until there was nothing left but gray. Like the island was erasing itself piece by piece. 3 weeks. That's how long I'd been back. Long enough to find an apartment above the old bait shop on Harbor Street. Long enough to learn that Mrs. Chen still ran the diner on Main, and that she still remembered how I liked my eggs. Long enough to feel the weight of this place settling back onto my shoulders, familiar as an old coat I'd tried to throw away. I hadn't planned on coming back. For 10 years, I'd told myself Ravenshore was behind me, a small, cold island I'd escaped the moment I turned 18. I'd built a life in the city, made detective by 26, had an apartment with actual heating and neighbors who didn't know my family's name, but plans change. People break. My hand drifted to my neck without thinking. I caught myself and pulled it back down. The coffee was definitely cold now. I poured it down the sink and watched it spiral away, then grabbed my jacket from the hook by the door. The leather was cracked and soft, older than my career. It smelled like city rain and late nights and a version of myself I was trying to forget. Outside, the fog had teeth. It bit at my face as I walked toward the station, dampening everything, sound, light, the sharp edges of the buildings. Ravenshore in the fog was a ghost town, all muted colors and shapes that could be anything. I passed the hardware store, the pharmacy, the bar where my father used to drink before he stopped coming home at all. The buildings looked the same as they had 20 years ago. Nothing changed here. That was the point. The police station sat at the edge of Main Street, a squat brick building that had been old when my grandmother was young. I pushed through the door and the familiar smell hit me: burnt coffee, old paper, and something vaguely metallic that I'd never been able to identify. The Ravenshore PD, 6 officers, 2 detectives now that I was here, and a chief who'd been doing this job since before I was born. Hartley. I looked up. Thomas Burke stood by the coffee machine, a mug in his hand and an expression on his face that I'd come to recognize over the past 3 weeks. Guarded, careful, like he was always measuring his words before he let them out. Burke. He nodded once and turned back to his coffee. That was about as warm as our conversations got. Burke had been a detective in Ravenshore for almost 30 years. He'd worked cases I'd only read about in the files: the Marina fire of '09, the Holloway disappearance, the string of burglaries that turned out to be the mayor's kid. He knew this island better than anyone alive. He also knew my family, which meant he knew about Emma. Everyone knew about Emma. I hung my jacket on the back of my chair and sat down at my desk. It was pushed against the wall, facing Burke's, close enough that I could hear him breathing if the room got quiet. Small station, small island, small everything. After the city, it felt like wearing shoes 2 sizes too tight. "Anything comin' overnight?" I asked. Burke shook his head without looking up from his computer. Quiet. Jim Parsons called about someone parking in front of his driveway again. I told him to take it up with the ferry schedule. I almost smiled. Almost. The morning passed the way mornings had been passing since I arrived, slow, uneventful, thick with the kind of silence that felt intentional. I reviewed old case files, answered 2 calls about noise complaints, ate a sandwich from the diner that tasted exactly like the sandwiches I remembered from childhood, which was either comforting or depressing depending on how I looked at it. Around noon, I stepped outside for air. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing the shape of the harbor below. Fishing boats bobbed in their slips, nets drying on the docks. Beyond them, the water stretched out gray and endless until it met the sky and you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I'd forgotten how isolated it felt here. In the city, you were never alone. There were always people, cars, noise, life pressing in from every direction. Here, you could stand on the edge of the island and feel like the last person on Earth. The ferry came twice a day in good weather, less when the fog was bad. There was a bridge, technically, but it was old and narrow and most people avoided it unless they had no choice. When you came to Ravenshore, you stayed until Ravenshore let you leave. My hand went to my neck again. This time I didn't stop it. The scar was thin, barely visible unless you knew where to look. A line across my throat, just above the collarbone, where a man named David Rionner had held a knife for 6 hours while he explained, in detail, what he was going to do to me. He'd been a suspect in a trafficking case. I'd gotten too close. He decided to teach me a lesson about asking questions. The task force found me in a warehouse on the east side, dehydrated and bleeding but alive. Rionner was dead, shot by SWAT when he refused to drop the knife. Case closed. Justice served. Everyone said I was lucky. I didn't feel lucky. I felt like a person who'd been taken apart and put back together wrong, with pieces missing and others jammed in where they didn't fit. The department psychologist had cleared me for duty after 3 months. My captain had recommended I take more time. My apartment had started to feel like a cage. So when the job in Ravenshore opened up, small island, quiet work, a chance to be useful without being in the middle of everything, I'd applied before I could talk myself out of it. Coming home, that's what I told people. Coming home to heal. But standing there on the edge of the harbor, watching the fog creep back in like it had never left, I wasn't sure healing was possible here. Ravenshore held too much. My mother's grave up on the hill. My father's empty chair in a bar I couldn't bring myself to enter. And Emma, always Emma, in every corner of this island, every face that looked at me with pity and recognition. Asterisk the Hartley girl, the one whose sister was murdered. Asterisk I'd left to escape that. Now I was back and the weight of it was already pressing down, filling my lungs like water. The radio on my hip crackled, Burke's voice flat and professional. "Hartley, you copy?" I unclipped it. "Yeah, what's up?" A pause, then. "Might want to come back in. Chief wants to see us both." I looked out at the fog one more time. It was thicker now, swallowing the boats again, erasing the world. "On my way," I said. I walked back toward the station, my boots echoing on the wet pavement. Somewhere out there, beyond the gray, the rest of the world was moving on. Cars and crowds and lives that had nothing to do with this place. But I was here now. For better or worse, I was here. And Ravenshore, I was starting to remember. Never let go of anything. Chief Martinez was a big man with a small office. He sat behind his desk like a boulder that had been there so long the room had grown around it, papers stacked in towers on either side of him, a coffee mug with a faded logo that might have said "World's Best Dad" 20 years ago. Burke was already there when I walked in, standing against the wall with his arms crossed. He didn't look at me. "Hartley, close the door." I did, then took the only other chair. It creaked under my weight like it was personally offended. Martinez studied me for a moment. He had the kind of face that gave nothing away. Decades of small-town politics and island secrets had taught him how to keep his thoughts locked up tight. I'd known him my whole life, the way you know everyone in a place like Ravenshore. He'd been at Emma's funeral. He'd been at my mother's, too. "How are you settling in?" he asked. "Fine. Burke treating you okay?" I glanced at Burke. He was examining something fascinating on the ceiling. "We're getting along." Martinez nodded slowly like he was weighing my words for lies. "Good, that's good." He leaned back in his chair and it groaned in protest. "I wanted to check in, see how you're doing, coming back here after. Everything can't be easy." I kept my face neutral. "I appreciate the concern, Chief, but I'm here to work." "I know you are." He paused. "Your father was a good man. Sarah before he wasn't. And your mother." He stopped, shook his head. "This island took a lot from your family. I just want to make sure it doesn't take anything else." My hand twitched toward my neck. I forced it to stay on the armrest. "I'm fine," I said. "Really?" Martinez looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. Burke, you're dismissed. Sarah, stay a minute." Burke pushed off the wall and left without a word. The door clicked shut behind him. Martinez waited until his footsteps faded down the hall. Then he leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Burke's a good cop. Best I've got. But he's complicated, especially when it comes to your family." "What do you mean?" "He worked your sister's case, back when it happened." Martinez's eyes were steady on mine. It was his first real homicide, only real homicide we'd had in 30 years until, well, he spread his hands. He never solved it. I think it still eats at him. I absorbed that. Burke, young and eager, standing over Emma's body. Burke, hitting dead ends, watching the case go cold. Burke, seeing me walk into his station 20 years later, the little girl who used to ask why no one could find the person who hurt her sister. "He never mentioned it," I said. "He wouldn't." Martinez stood, signaling the conversation was over. "Just be patient with him. He's carrying things, we all are, on this island." I stood too. "Is that all? For now?" He walked me to the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. "Sarah, if you ever need to talk about anything, my door's open, I mean that." "Thank you, Chief." He opened the door. Burke was at his desk, pretending to read something on his computer. I walked past him to my own chair and sat down. The silence between us felt heavier now, weighted with things I didn't know how to ask. An hour passed. Then 2. Burke typed, I read files. The clock on the wall ticked loud enough to count. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. You worked my sister's case. Burke's fingers stopped on the keyboard. He didn't look up. Martinez told you? Yeah. Silence, then. It was a long time ago. Not that long. He finally turned to face me. His eyes were tired, not from lack of sleep, but from something deeper, the kind of tired that builds up over years. I was 32, he said. Been on the force for 8 years, thought I knew everything, thought I could solve anything if I just worked hard enough. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Your sister was my first real case, my only real case until he stopped. It broke something in me, not being able to find who did it. Did you have any leads? A few, none that panned out. He turned back to his computer. I don't want to talk about this, Hartley. I need to know. No, you don't. His voice was sharp now. Your sister's case is closed. Cold, has been for 20 years. You coming back here doesn't change that. You poking around in old files doesn't change that. Some things don't get solved. Some things just stay broken. I stared at the back of his head. My hands were clenched on my desk. I'm not here to poke around in old files, I said quietly. I'm here to do a job. Good. He didn't turn around. Then do it. Rest of the day passed in silence. Not the comfortable kind, the kind that felt like a wall. Burke on one side, me on the other, and Emma somewhere in between, a ghost neither of us could talk about. At 5, I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. Hartley. I stopped, my hand on the frame. I'm sorry. Burke's voice was rough. About earlier, it's not your fault. None of this is your fault. I looked back at him. He was still facing his computer, but his shoulders had dropped, some of the tension bleeding out. I know, I said. It's just, he shook his head. Seeing you here, it brings it all back. Every day I look at you and I see that case. I see everything I couldn't do. I'm not here for that, I said. I'm not here to blame you for anything. I know. He finally turned, and for the first time I saw something other than walls in his eyes. Something that might have been guilt or grief or both. But I blame myself. I have for 20 years. That's not going to change just because you're back. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and walked out into the fog. The harbor was invisible again, swallowed whole. I stood on the steps of the station and breathed in the salt air, feeling the dampness settle on my skin. Burke was carrying something. I could see it now. A weight that had shaped him, bent him, made him into the guarded man who couldn't look me in the eye. He wasn't my enemy. He was just someone else that Ravenshore had broken. I walked home through the gray, thinking about ghosts. Emma's, Burke's, my own. We were all haunted here. The only difference was whether we admitted it. I didn't sleep well that night. Dreams of Emma, of the warehouse, of a knife pressing against my throat, they blurred together until I couldn't tell which nightmare was which. I woke at 4 in the morning, tangled in sheets that smelled like salt and mildew, and gave up on rest. By 6, I was walking. Ravenshore wasn't big. You could cross the whole island in a few hours if you walked fast, less if you stuck to the roads. But I didn't want to stick to the roads. I wanted to remember. I started at the harbor, where the fishing boats were already heading out. Men in rubber boots and thick jackets moved through the pre-dawn dark, hauling nets and calling to each other in voices worn rough by years of wind and spray. They looked at me as I passed. Some nodded, some didn't, but no one stopped to talk. I was still an outsider here, even after 20 years away, or maybe because of it. From the harbor, I walked up Main Street. The shops were closed, their windows dark, but I remembered what they looked like in daylight. The hardware store where my father used to buy nails by the pound. The pharmacy that still had a soda counter in the back. The diner where Mrs. Chen was probably already starting the coffee, the way she had every morning since before I was born. At the end of Main Street, the road forked. Left went to the police station, to the small cluster of municipal buildings that passed for a town center. Right went up. I went right. The cliff road wound through trees that grew sideways from the wind, their branches reaching toward the mainland like they were trying to escape. The fog was thinner up here, and I could see glimpses of the water below, gray and restless, churning against rocks that had been worn smooth by centuries of tides. The houses started about halfway up. Not houses, really. Mansions. Estates. The kind of places that had names instead of addresses, with gates and hedges and long driveways that disappeared into manicured grounds. Old money lived up here, families whose names were carved into the stone of the island's history. The Parteleus, the Ashfords, the Kincaids. They looked down on the harbor, on the working-class homes clustered near the water. They always had. I didn't stop at any of the gates. I just walked, letting the road carry me higher until the mansions thinned out and there was nothing but wind and rock and the occasional raven watching from a fence post. The cemetery sat at the top of the island, where the cliff dropped away to nothing. It was small. Ravenshore didn't have enough people to need a big one, but old. Some of the headstones dated back to the 1800s, names worn smooth by weather until they were barely legible. I found my family's plot near the back, under an oak tree that had somehow survived the salt wind. 3 graves in a row. My father's was the oldest. James Hartley, 1955 to 2010. He died of a heart attack in the bar on Main Street 3 years after Emma. The drinking had gotten worse after she died. Then our mother left him. Then there was nothing to get better for. My mother's grave was next to his. Margaret Hartley, 1960 to 2015. Suicide wasn't written on the headstone, but it didn't need to be. Everyone knew. She'd walked into the water one January morning and let the cold take her. I'd been in the city by then, in my 2nd year at the academy. I came back for the funeral, stood in this exact spot, and swore I'd never come back again. So much for promises. Emma's grave was the smallest. Emma Hartley, 1988 to 2006. Beloved daughter and sister. Taken too soon. Taken, such a gentle word for what had happened. Taken like she'd wandered off and gotten lost. Like someone had simply picked her up and carried her away. She'd been murdered. Stabbed and left in an alley behind the cannery that used to operate on the east side of the island. No witnesses, no weapon, no suspects that ever panned out. Just a 20-year-old girl with her whole life ahead of her, bleeding out in the dark while the rest of Ravenshore slept. I crouched down and brushed leaves off her headstone. The stone was cold under my fingers, rough with age. "I'm back," I said. "I don't know why, I don't know if it'll help anything, but I'm back." The wind answered, rustling the leaves of the oak tree. A raven called somewhere in the distance, harsh and mocking. I stayed there for a long time, watching the fog roll across the water below. Thinking about Emma at 19, at 16, at 12. Her laugh, her terrible taste in music. The way she used to braid my hair on Sunday mornings while our mother made breakfast. She should have gotten out. She was the smart one, the ambitious one. She'd been saving money for years, planning to leave for the city the moment she turned 21. Get a degree, get a job, get as far from Ravenshore as possible. Instead, she'd taken a job at some tech company, Viktor Parteleu's company. I'd later learn, though I didn't know it at the time. She was going to save up faster, leave sooner. 3 months later she was dead. I hadn't understood then. I was 8 years old, too young to grasp the permanence of it. I just knew that Emma was gone and my mother was crying and my father was drinking and nothing made sense anymore. 20 years later, it still didn't. I stood, my knees protesting the cold. The sun was fully up now, weak and pale through the overcast sky. Time to get back. Burke was probably already at the station, pretending not to wait for me. I took one last look at Emma's headstone. "I'm going to find out what happened to you," I said. "I don't care how long it takes. I don't care what I have to dig up. Someone on this island knows the truth, and I'm going to find them." The raven called again, closer this time. I turned and walked back down the cliff road, past the mansions with their gates and their secrets, past the sideways trees and the watching birds. The fog was thickening again, swallowing the world in gray. But I could see clearly now, clearer than I had in years. I hadn't come back to Ravenshore to heal. I'd come back to finish something. The call came 3 days later. I was at my desk, halfway through a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago when Burke's phone rang. He answered it the way he answered everything, gruff, minimal, like words cost money. "Burke," pause, "where?" Longer pause, his face changed. "We're on our way." He hung up and stood, grabbing his jacket from the back of his chair. I was already reaching for mine. "What is it?" "Body." The word landed heavy in the quiet station. "Miller's Lane, near the cannery." Something cold moved through my chest, the cannery, where Emma had been found. Burke must have seen it in my face because he paused, one arm in his jacket. "You good?" "I'm fine, let's go." We took his truck, a beat-up Ford that smelled like old cigarettes and pine air freshener. The drive was short, maybe 5 minutes, but it felt longer. The fog had lifted overnight, replaced by a gray drizzle that streaked the windshield and turned the world soft at the edges. Miller's Lane was a side road that ran between the old cannery and a row of storage buildings that hadn't been used in years. It was the kind of place people forgot existed, too far from Main Street to matter, too close to the industrial side of the harbor to be worth developing. A nothing road to a nothing place. Except now, there were 3 patrol cars blocking the entrance, lights flashing red and blue against the gray morning. Burke pulled up behind them and killed the engine. We got out together, the drizzle immediately finding the gap between my collar and my neck. Officer Danny Reyes met us at the barrier. He was young, mid-20s maybe, with the kind of face that hadn't learned yet how to hide what it was feeling. Right now, it was feeling sick. Detective Burke, Detective Hartley. He nodded to each of us. She's back there, Doc's on the way. Who found her? Guy named Pete Olson. Cuts through here on his way to the docks. Reyes swallowed hard, said he almost stepped on her. Burke grunted, show us. We followed Reyes down Miller's Lane, stepping around puddles that reflected the gray sky. The storage buildings loomed on our right, their windows dark and broken. On our left, the old cannery rose like a dead thing, its metal siding rusted and peeling. I tried not to think about Emma. I failed. The body was about 50 yards in, lying in the middle of the lane like she'd just decided to lie down and never get up. A patrol officer stood nearby, looking anywhere but at her. I didn't blame him. She was on her back, arms at her sides, eyes open and staring at nothing. Mid-30s, brown hair matted with rain and something darker. She was wearing jeans and a sweater that might have been blue before the blood soaked through it. The blood was everywhere. Pooled beneath her, spreading across the cracked asphalt, diluted by the rain into pink rivers that snaked toward the gutter. I counted 3 wounds in her torso, maybe more hidden beneath the blood, stabbed, like Emma. My hand went to my neck, I forced it back down. Anyone know her? Burke asked, crouching next to the body without touching it. Megan Collins, Reyes said, lived on Harbor Street, few blocks from the diner. Tech worker, I think, kept to herself. I made myself look at her face, tried to see past the death, past the rain, past the wrongness of it all. She'd been pretty once, now she was just empty. First murder since, Reyes stopped, glancing at me. Sorry, I didn't mean, since my sister, I finished for him. 20 years. Burke stood, his knees cracking. We don't know it's murder yet. I looked at him, he looked back. Neither of us believed what he'd just said, but he was right to say it. Procedure mattered. Assumptions killed cases. Any witnesses? I asked. None so far, we're canvassing, but this area's pretty dead. Reyes winced at his word choice. I mean quiet, nobody around. Security cameras? Checking, most of these buildings have been abandoned for years, but there might be something on the cannery. I nodded, already filing that away. What do we know about her? Megan Collins? Not much yet. She's been here her whole life, I think. Works for some tech company, AlgoTech. Something like that, does computer stuff from home. Reyes shrugged. Quiet, no enemies anyone knows about, just normal. Normal people didn't end up stabbed on back roads. Burke was circling the body now, eyes scanning the ground, looking for footprints, drag marks, anything. The rain had probably washed most of it away. No weapon, he said. No purse, no phone. Robbery? Maybe. But his tone said he didn't think so. I stood there, rain soaking into my jacket, and looked at Megan Collins. At her open eyes, her ruined sweater, the blood turning pink in the puddles. 20 years. That's how long Ravenshore had gone without a murder. 20 years of quiet, of peace, of people telling themselves that what happened to Emma was a one-time thing, a tragedy, sure, but not a pattern. Not something that would happen again. Now it had. I thought about what I'd said at Emma's grave 3 days ago. Asterisk, someone on this island knows the truth, and I'm going to find them. Asterisk, maybe this was connected. Maybe it wasn't. But standing there in the rain, looking at another dead woman in the shadow of the cannery, I couldn't shake the feeling that Ravenshore was waking up. That whatever had killed my sister wasn't finished. The medical examiner's van pulled up at the end of Miller's Lane. Burke waved them in. Hartley. He was looking at me with something that might have been concern. You sure you're good? I wasn't, but I'd stopped being good a long time ago. Let's work the scene, I said, and that's what we did. Megan Collins lived in a small house on the east end of Harbor Street, about 2 blocks from my apartment. I'd probably walked past it a dozen times without noticing. That was the thing about Ravenshore. Everything was close, but nothing connected until you needed it to. Burke and I got the keys from her landlord, a thin man named Patterson who looked like he hadn't slept since the 60s. He stood on the porch while we went inside, wringing his hands and muttering about how she'd always been a good tenant, always paid on time, never any trouble. She keep to herself? I asked. Everyone keeps to themselves here, detective. He said it like it was obvious. That's why people stay. The house was small, living room, kitchen, 1 bedroom, 1 bath, clean but not obsessive about it. The kind of place that looked like someone lived there rather than staged for a magazine. I started in the living room while Burke took the kitchen. The furniture was old but decent, the kind you picked up secondhand and never bothered to replace. A bookshelf against one wall held a mix of paperbacks and technical manuals, programming languages, data analysis, machine learning. Not light reading. Her laptop sat on a desk by the window, closed. I didn't touch it. That would go to our tech guy, such as he was, but I made a note. Tech worker who worked from home. Her whole professional life was probably on that machine. Hartley. Burke's voice from the kitchen. I found him standing in front of the refrigerator, staring at a photo held up by a magnet. It showed Megan, younger, smiling with her arm around another woman. They were standing on the ferry dock, the mainland visible in the background. Sister? I guessed. Don't know, we'll find out. There were more photos on the fridge. Megan at a birthday party. Megan hiking somewhere green and lush, not Ravenshore, definitely. Megan with a group of people at what looked like a company event, everyone wearing matching polo shirts with a logo I couldn't quite make out. Normal life. Normal woman, dead in an alley. She's got mail, Burke said, nodding toward a pile on the counter. I flipped through it. Bills, junk, a postcard from someone in Portland. Nothing that screamed motive. The bedroom was more of the same. Bed made, clothes in the closet, nightstand with a book and a glass of water that had gone stale. I checked the book, some thriller about a detective in New York. Irony noted. Her bathroom told me she used generic shampoo and didn't wear much makeup. Her medicine cabinet held ibuprofen, vitamins, and a prescription for something I didn't recognize. I photographed the label. Burke, you seeing anything? Nothing obvious. He appeared in the doorway. No signs of forced entry, no signs of struggle. Whatever happened to her, it didn't happen here. So she left, went somewhere, and never came back. Looks like. I stood in the middle of Megan Collins's bedroom and tried to see her, tried to understand who she'd been, what her days looked like, why someone would want her dead. Tech worker. Lived alone, kept to herself. Worked for a company called AlgoTech. I remembered Ray's saying that at the scene. What do we know about her job? I asked. Not much yet. I've got Ray's tracking down her employer. AlgoTech, what do they do? Burke shrugged. Something with computers. Algorithms, I guess from the name. They've got an office on the other side of the island near the bridge. She work remote? Looks like it. He gestured around the room. No commute clothes, no briefcase, just a laptop and a lot of coffee mugs. I nodded slowly. A woman who could work anywhere in the world, do her job from a beach or a city or a cabin in the mountains, and she chose to stay in Ravenshore. Why? I said out loud. Why what? Why stay here? If you work remote, you can live anywhere. Why stay on an island at the edge of nowhere? Burke considered that. Family, maybe, roots. Some people don't want to leave home. She doesn't have any family listed in her records. Parents died years ago, no siblings on file. Friends, then, comfort, fear of change. He shrugged again. Not everyone's running from something, Hartley. But some people were running from something, and some people stayed because they couldn't leave, because something held them here, whether they admitted it or not. I looked around the room one more time. At the neatly made bed, the stale water, the book she'd never finish. Megan Collins had been murdered 3 days ago. She'd been living her quiet life, going to bed at night, waking up in the morning, doing her job and eating her meals and existing in this small house on this small island. And then someone had stabbed her and left her in the rain. Who? Why? I want to talk to her employer, I said. AlgoTech. Find out what she was working on, who she talked to if anything seemed off. Already on the list. And I want her phone records, email, everything. Tech's working on it. I took a breath. Let it out. The house felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. This is the first murder in 20 years, I said. The first since Emma. You know what that means? Burke's face was unreadable. It means we've got work to do. It means someone on this island kills people. Killed my sister, killed Megan Collins, and we've been living with them the whole time. Burke didn't answer. He just looked at me with those tired eyes, the ones that had been carrying Emma's case for 2 decades. "Let's go," I said. "We've got interviews to do." We locked up the house and left Patterson standing on the porch, still wringing his hands. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray, still heavy with the promise of more to come. Somewhere on this island, a killer was waiting, watching, and I was going to find them. Canvassing in Ravenshore was like pulling teeth from a clam. Everyone had a wall up, everyone spoke in half sentences, everyone looked at us like we were the problem. We started with Megan's neighbors. The woman next door, Mrs. Takahashi, 70s, widow, said Megan was quiet, polite, never had visitors. The man across the street, Jerry something, retired fisherman, said he'd seen her walking to the diner sometimes but couldn't remember when. The family 2 houses down said they barely knew she existed. "It's like she was a ghost," I said to Burke as we walked back to the truck. "Lived here her whole life and nobody knows anything about her. That's Ravenshore." He unlocked the driver's side. "People mind their own business. People are hiding something. That too." We drove to the diner. Mrs. Chen was behind the counter, same as always, her gray hair pulled back in a bun and her apron spotted with grease. The lunch rush, such as it was, had died down, leaving us alone except for an old man nursing coffee in the corner booth. "Sarah." Mrs. Chen's face softened when she saw me, then hardened when she saw Burke. "Detectives, I heard about Megan, terrible thing. Did you know her well?" I asked. "Well enough. She came in 2-3 times a week. Always got the same thing, turkey sandwich, no tomato, iced tea." Mrs. Chen shook her head. "Quiet girl, kept to herself. Tipped good. Did she ever come in with anyone? Meet anyone here?" "Not that I remember. She usually ate alone, had her laptop with her sometimes, working on something." Mrs. Chen wiped the counter even though it was already clean. "I asked her once what she did. She said something about computers, made it sound boring on purpose, like she didn't want to talk about it. Do you know who she worked for?" "Some company, AlgoTech, I think." Mrs. Chen shrugged. "They've got an office near the bridge, do something with data, whatever that means." I made a note. "Did she ever mention anyone giving her trouble? Arguments, threats, anything like that?" "Megan?" Mrs. Chen almost laughed. "That girl wouldn't argue with a seagull. She was the quietest person I knew." The almost laugh faded. "That's why this doesn't make sense. Who would want to hurt her?" We asked a few more questions, got a few more non-answers, and left. The old man in the corner booth watched us go but didn't say anything. Back in the truck, Burke pulled out his phone. Ray's texted, "AlgoTech's parent company is coming up in the background check." "Parent company?" "They are a subsidiary, owned by a bigger firm." He scrolled through the message, his face tightening. "Parteleu Industries." The name hit me like cold water. Parteleu, one of the Cliff families. Old money, old power, old everything. "Viktor Parteleu." I said, "That's the one." I knew the name. Everyone on Ravenshore knew the name. Viktor Parteleu was one of the richest men on the island, tech company, investments, real estate on the mainland. His family had been here for generations, their mansion looming over the harbor like a stone god. So Megan worked for a company owned by Viktor Parteleu. Looks like. I stared out the window. The fog was creeping back in, softening the edges of the buildings. I want to talk to him. Burke didn't start the truck. Parteleu's not the kind of man you just talk to. He's got lawyers, gates, people who screen his calls. Then we go through the company, AlgoTech, start there, work our way up. "Sarah? What?" He was gripping the steering wheel now, even though we weren't moving. His knuckles were white. "Parteleu Industries, they were involved in your sister's case, tangentially." I went very still. "What do you mean?" "Emma worked for one of their subsidiaries, before she died, a data company called DataCore." Burke finally looked at me. I looked into it back then, couldn't find any connection, but the name came up. The air in the truck felt thin suddenly, hard to breathe. "You never mentioned this." It didn't lead anywhere, dead end like everything else. "My sister worked for Viktor Parteleu? For a company he owned, there's a difference." But Burke's voice said he wasn't sure there was. I sat with that, felt it settle into my bones. Emma had worked for a Parteleu company. Now Megan had worked for a Parteleu company. Both were dead, both stabbed, 20 years apart. "I want everything we have on Parteleu Industries," I said. "Every subsidiary, every employee, every connection to the island, everything." "Sarah, this isn't a coincidence, Burke." I turned to face him. "You know it isn't. My sister works for him, she ends up dead. Megan works for him, she ends up dead." Same method, same island, same company. The only thing that changed is the time. Burke's jaw tightened. Viktor Parteleu is untouchable. You go after him without solid evidence, he'll bury this investigation in lawyers before we get a second interview. Then we get solid evidence. How? We start with AlgoTech. Talk to her coworkers. Find out what she was working on, who she talked to if anything seemed off. I took a breath. And then we work our way up, carefully, quietly, until we're at his door and he can't turn us away. Burke studied me for a long moment. I could see him calculating the risks, the politics, the 20 years of failure that had taught him to be careful. All right, he said finally. We do it your way, but we do it smart. No accusations, no theories, no names until we have something real. Agreed. He started the truck. The engine rumbled to life, and we pulled away from the diner, heading toward the bridge and the AlgoTech office on the other side. I watched the harbor disappear in the rearview mirror. The fog was thickening, swallowing everything. Viktor Parteleu, the name circled in my head like a shark. 2 dead women, 1 company, 1 man at the top. Coincidence didn't exist in murder investigations, only connections waiting to be found. That night, I did what I always did when I couldn't sleep. I worked. My apartment didn't have much: a bed, a kitchen, a bathroom that took 10 minutes to heat up, but it had a table by the window, and that's where I spread everything out. Laptop open, notepad ready, coffee that I kept reheating until it tasted like burnt regret. Viktor Parteleu. I started with the public record. Born 1963 in Ravenshore, only child of Heinrich and Margaret Parteleu. Old money. The family had been on the island since the 1880s, back when they owned half the fishing fleet and most of the harbor. Over the generations, they'd transitioned from fishing to shipping to real estate to tech, always staying one step ahead of the economy. Viktor had taken over Parteleu Industries in 1992 after his father's death. Since then, he'd expanded it into a sprawling network of subsidiaries and investments. AI surveillance systems, data analytics, security software, all the things that made the modern world run and no one really understood. The company's headquarters was on the mainland, but Viktor still lived in Ravenshore, in the family mansion on the cliffs. He was on the boards of 3 charities. He'd funded the renovation of the library in 2015. He donated a new wing to the medical center in 2018. The local paper, what was left of it, treated him like royalty. I dug deeper. His wife had died in 2001, cancer, according to the obituary. No children, no remarriage. He lived alone in that massive house, surrounded by staff and gates, and the kind of silence that only money could buy. His companies employed, directly or indirectly, about 40% of Ravenshore's working population. The police chief's salary came from a budget that included Parteleu donations. The mayor had run on a platform of modernizing the island with technology, Parteleu's technology. The man had his fingers in everything, and everyone owed him something. I pulled up DataCore next, the company Emma had worked for. It had been absorbed into Parteleu Industries in 2010, 4 years after Emma died. Before that, it had operated as a semi-independent subsidiary focused on data collection and processing. I couldn't find employee records from 20 years ago, but I made a note to dig deeper. Then AlgoTech, Megan's employer, a smaller company focused on algorithm development and machine learning. They did contract work for Parteleu's main surveillance division, building the software that made the cameras smart, the systems adaptive, the data useful. 2 women, 2 subsidiaries, 1 man. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. What was the connection? Why these women? Why 20 years apart? Emma had been young, just starting out. A data entry job, probably, something basic, a foot in the door. She'd been saving money to leave the island. Instead, she'd ended up dead in an alley. Megan had been experienced mid-career, a tech worker who could have gone anywhere but stayed. Stayed in a house by the harbor, stayed on an island at the edge of nowhere, stayed working for a company owned by the richest man in town. Why? I wrote the question on my notepad and circled it 3 times. The fog had crept up to my window while I worked, pressing against the glass like it wanted to come in. I checked the time, 2:47 a.m. I should sleep. I wouldn't. I pulled up a satellite image of the island instead. Ravenshore from above, a rough oval of green and gray surrounded by water. The harbor at the bottom, Main Street cutting through the middle, the cliffs rising on the north side. I could see the mansions up there, spread out like chess pieces on a board. The Parteleu estate was the largest. It sat at the highest point of the cliff, overlooking everything. From up there, Viktor could watch the whole island, could see who came and went on the ferry, could see the lights in the harbor at night, the fishing boats leaving at dawn. All-seeing, all-knowing. I thought about the surveillance systems his company built. Cameras that tracked faces, software that predicted behavior, AI that learned from watching. The future of security, the brochures probably said. A safer world, or a world where someone was always watching. Where privacy was a relic and secrets were impossible. What if Megan had found something in that world? Something she wasn't supposed to see? What if Emma had found the same thing, 20 years ago? I didn't have evidence. I had speculation, pattern recognition, the desperate hope that maybe this time I could find an answer. But I'd been a detective long enough to know that coincidences were usually just connections waiting to be proven. My phone buzzed. Burke. Asterisk got the AlgoTech interview set up. Tomorrow at 10. Office near the bridge. You in? Asterisk I typed back. Asterisk I'm in. Asterisk then I closed my laptop, turned off the lamp, and lay down on my bed without undressing. The fog pressed against the window. The ceiling stared back at me. Viktor Parteleu. The name sat in my head like a stone. Rich, powerful, connected, the kind of man who could make problems disappear. The kind of man who could silence anyone who got too close to his secrets. Had Emma gotten too close? Had Megan? I didn't know. But I was going to find out, even if I had to tear this island apart to do it. AlgoTech's office sat in a converted warehouse near the old bridge, the kind of building that tried to look modern but couldn't hide its industrial bones. Glass doors had been cut into the original brick facade, and someone had planted a row of shrubs along the front that were losing their battle against the salt air. Burke and I arrived at 9:55. A receptionist with two bright eyes and a headset led us to a conference room on the second floor, where we waited for exactly 7 minutes before the door opened. The man who entered was young, early 30s, maybe, with the kind of haircut that cost more than my weekly groceries. He introduced himself as Marcus Webb, head of operations, and shook our hands with the practiced enthusiasm of someone who'd been media trained. Terrible news about Megan, he said, settling into a chair across from us. Everyone here is devastated. She was a valued member of our team. How long did she work here? Burke asked. 8 years, give or take. Started as a junior developer, worked her way up. She was brilliant, really understood the data side of things. What exactly did she do? Webb launched into an explanation of machine learning algorithms and predictive modeling that I followed about half of. The gist was that Megan helped build the software that made Parteleu's surveillance systems smarter, teaching computers to recognize patterns, flag anomalies, predict behavior. Did she work with anyone closely? I asked. Collaborate on projects? We're a small team, everyone works with everyone. Webb smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Megan was a bit of a loner, though, preferred working from home, came into the office maybe once a week, if that. Any conflicts, disagreements with coworkers? Nothing I ever heard about. Like I said, she kept to herself. The same refrain, quiet. Kept to herself? Nobody knew anything. What about her personal life? Burke pressed. Did she ever mention friends, relationships, anyone she spent time with? Webb shrugged. We didn't really talk about that stuff. She was private. I let the silence stretch. In interviews, silence was a tool. Most people couldn't stand it, and they'd fill it with something useful just to make it stop. Webb shifted in his chair but didn't crack. We'd like to talk to her coworkers, I said. Anyone who worked directly with her on projects. Of course, I'll have HR put together a list. He stood, clearly eager to end the conversation. Is there anything else? One more thing. I kept my voice casual. Your company is owned by Parteleu Industries, correct? Something flickered in Webb's face. Just for a moment. That's right. Does Mr. Parteleu have much involvement with AlgoTech directly? Not really. He's more of a silent investor. We operate independently. The smile was back, but stiffer now. Why do you ask? Just trying to understand the full picture. Webb nodded slowly. Well, if you have questions about Parteleu Industries, you'd have to talk to them directly. We're just a subsidiary. He showed us out to the main floor, where a dozen people sat at computers in an open-plan layout. Most of them glanced up as we passed, then quickly looked away. The air smelled like coffee and anxiety. "I'll walk you to the exit," Webb said. We were almost to the door when someone called out. "Marcus, do you have a minute? The integration test is—" The voice stopped as the speaker noticed us. I turned. The man was mid-40s, average height, average build, with graying hair and glasses that made his eyes look slightly too large. He wore a rumpled button-down that suggested he'd been here all night. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't realize you had visitors." "Detectives Hartley and Burke," Webb said. "They're here about Megan." The man's expression shifted, sympathy, maybe, or something performing as sympathy. "Terrible thing, she was a good colleague." "And you are?" I asked. "Pier Aberdeen." He extended his hand. His grip was firm but not aggressive. "Senior systems architect. I've been with the company since the beginning." "Did you work with Megan?" "On occasion. Different departments mostly, but our projects overlapped sometimes." He shook his head. "She was sharp, really understood the infrastructure. It's a loss." "Was there anything unusual about her lately? Any changes in behavior, concerns she mentioned?" Aberdeen considered the question like he was actually thinking about it, unlike Webb's rehearsed answers. "Not that I noticed, but like I said, we weren't close. Different orbits." He smiled apologetically. "I wish I could be more helpful." "You've got my card," I said to Webb. "If you think of anything, or if anyone here has information, please reach out." "Of course." We left through the glass doors, stepping out into the gray morning. The shrubs rustled in the wind. Somewhere in the distance, a foghorn sounded. "What did you think?" Burke asked as we walked to the truck. "Webb's hiding something, too polished, too eager to get rid of us." "And the other one, Aberdeen?" I thought about him. The rumpled shirt, the too large glasses, the firm handshake. Something about him had been off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. "Seemed helpful," I said finally. "Forgettable," Burke grunted, so the opposite of Webb. "Yeah." I climbed into the passenger seat. "Let's go talk to Viktor Parteleu." Parteleu Industries occupied a building that didn't belong on the island. It was all glass and steel, 3 stories of corporate architecture planted on the cliff road like someone had dropped it from the mainland and forgotten to pick it up. The parking lot held cars that cost more than most people's houses. Burke waited in the truck. We'd agreed I'd take the first meeting with Viktor alone. Less confrontational, more likely to get him talking. The lobby was cool and quiet, all polished surfaces and indirect lighting. A receptionist who looked like she'd walked out of a magazine smiled and asked if she could help me. I showed my badge and said I was there to see Mr. Parteleu. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I'm investigating a murder, and Mr. Parteleu's company is connected to the victim." Her smile faltered. She picked up the phone, murmured something I couldn't hear, then nodded and hung up. "Someone will be down to escort you." I waited by a window that looked out over the cliff. From up here, I could see the whole harbor spread out below, the docks, the boats, the working side of Ravenshore that the people in this building probably never visited. My apartment was down there somewhere, a tiny square in a grid of tiny squares. "Detective Hartley?" I turned. The woman who'd spoken was in her 50s, severe haircut, dark suit, the kind of face that had learned how to give nothing away. "I'm Patricia Flynn, head of legal. I'll be sitting in on your meeting with Mr. Parteleu." She didn't phrase it as a question. "That's his right." "Follow me, please." We took an elevator to the 3rd floor and walked down a corridor lined with abstract art that probably cost more than my salary. Flynn knocked once on a door at the end, then opened it. The office was exactly what I'd expected. Massive desk, floor-to-ceiling windows, leather chairs, the kind of tasteful wealth that whispered instead of shouted. And behind the desk, Viktor Parteleu. He was in his 60s, distinguished in that way rich men often are: silver hair, sharp suit, the remnants of good looks weathered by time but not by hardship. He stood as I entered and came around the desk to shake my hand. "Detective Hartley." His grip was firm but brief. I was wondering when someone would come by. "Please sit." I took one of the leather chairs. Flynn positioned herself by the window, standing, arms crossed, watching. Viktor settled into the chair across from me, not behind his desk. Closer, more intimate, a calculated choice. "You're here about Megan Collins," he said, not a question. "That's right. Her employer AlgoTech does contract work for your company. Did contract work." He corrected me automatically. "The project wrapped up several months ago." "What kind of work?" "Algorithm development, machine learning systems for our surveillance division." He spread his hands. I don't pretend to understand the technical details, that's why I hire people. People like Megan Collins? I never met her personally. But yes, her company provided services we needed. You never met her? AlgoTech is one of dozens of contractors and subsidiaries. I can't know everyone. I watched his face as he spoke. There was something careful about him. Each word weighed before it left his mouth, each expression measured. He wasn't nervous exactly, but he wasn't relaxed either. Were you aware of any problems with her work, any disputes, disagreements? Not that I know of. You'd have to ask Marcus Webb. He's the one who handles the day-to-day with our partners. I spoke to him this morning. He said Megan was a valued employee. Then there you are. Viktor smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm afraid I don't know what else I can tell you. I let the silence stretch. He held my gaze for a moment, then looked away toward the window, toward Flynn, anywhere but at me. Guilty people did that. Innocent people usually didn't. Mr. Parteleu, I said, this is the first murder on Ravenshore in 20 years. Something flickered in his face, just for a moment. So I've heard. The last one was my sister, Emma Hartley. Now he went very still. Flynn shifted by the window, her eyes sharpening. I'm sorry for your loss, Viktor said carefully. That was before my time as a public figure. I don't recall the details. She worked for one of your subsidiaries, a company called DataCore. The stillness deepened. I watched him process that, watched him decide what to say next. I wasn't aware of that. He was lying. I could feel it. The way you feel a storm coming before the first drops fall. 2 women who worked for companies connected to you, both stabbed, both murdered on this island, 20 years apart. I leaned forward slightly. That's a hell of a coincidence. I don't know what you're implying, detective. His voice had gone cold, but I had nothing to do with either death. I'm not implying anything, I'm asking questions. And I've answered them. He stood abruptly, moving back behind his desk, putting that big wooden barrier between us. If you have evidence of wrongdoing, I'd be happy to cooperate through my attorneys. Otherwise, I think we're done here. Flynn was already moving toward the door. I stood slowly, taking my time. I may have more questions as the investigation continues. Then contact Miss Flynn. She'll arrange something. I met his eyes one more time. He held my gaze now, defiant, but there was something underneath it. Something that looked like fear. Guilty people were afraid of being caught. Thank you for your time, Mr. Parteleu. He didn't respond. Flynn escorted me out, and we didn't speak in the elevator or across the lobby. At the front door, she handed me a business card. For future inquiries, she said. Have a good day, detective. The glass doors closed behind me, and I walked across the parking lot to where Burke was waiting. The wind coming off the cliff was cold and sharp. Well, he asked as I climbed into the truck. He's hiding something. I stared up at the building, at the windows that reflected nothing but sky. Something about Emma. He knew she worked for him, I could see it, but he lied about it. Viktor Parteleu lies about a lot of things. He's scared, Burke. Underneath all that polish and all those lawyers, he's scared. Burke started the truck. Scared doesn't mean guilty. No, but it means he knows something. I pulled my notebook from my jacket and wrote down everything while it was fresh. And I'm going to find out what. We pulled out of the parking lot and headed back down the cliff road. In the rearview mirror, the glass building caught the gray light like a blade. Viktor Parteleu was at the center of this. Both victims had worked for him. Both had died the same way. I didn't believe in coincidence, and I didn't believe him. We drove back to the station in silence. Burke kept his eyes on the road, jaw tight, hands gripping the wheel harder than the curves required. He had something to say. He was choosing not to say it. I waited. We parked. Got out. Walked into the station past Ray's, who was on the phone and waved us through. Made it all the way to Burke's desk before he finally broke. You shouldn't have mentioned Emma. Why not? Because it tips our hand. Now Viktor knows you have a personal stake. He knows you're looking for connections. There are connections. 2 women, both working for his companies, both dead. He needs to know we see that. What he needs is to think we're incompetent. Burke dropped into his chair. You let a suspect know you're onto him, he has time to prepare. Destroy evidence. Get his story straight. His story was already straight. He had a lawyer in the room. And now he'll have 10 lawyers in the room if you ever get him in an interview again. Burke rubbed his face. I told you to be careful with him. I was careful. I asked questions. He lied. You don't know that. I know he claimed he didn't remember Emma working for DataCore. That's a lie, Burke. You can see it in someone's face when they're lying about something that matters. Burke went quiet. The wrong kind of quiet, the kind that meant he was holding something back. But aren't you telling me? Nothing. Don't do that. I pulled a chair over and sat across from him, forcing eye contact. You worked Emma's case for 20 years. You know things about this island, about these people that I don't. If Viktor Parteleu is connected to my sister's death, he's not. The words came out too fast, too certain. How do you know? Because I investigated him. Burke's voice dropped like he was afraid of being overheard. Back then, after Emma, I looked at everyone in the Cliff families, everyone with money, everyone with something to hide. Viktor's name came up because of the company connection, same as now, and nothing. He had alibis, witnesses. There was no physical evidence tying him to anything. Burke shook his head. I spent 6 months trying to make something stick. It didn't. That doesn't mean he's innocent. It means you couldn't prove it. There's a difference, Hartley. Is there? We stared at each other. The tension in the room was thick enough to breathe. You're too close to this, Burke said finally. Emma was your sister. I understand, but you're seeing connections that might not be there because you want them to be there. 2 women who worked for Viktor Parteleu are dead, both stabbed, 20 years apart. That's not a connection I invented, that's a fact. It's a coincidence. Coincidences don't exist in murder cases. Yes, they do. Burke leaned forward. Sometimes people die and there's no grand conspiracy. Sometimes it's random. Sometimes we never find out why. Is that what happened with Emma? Random? Unknowable? The question hung between us like smoke. Burke looked away. When he spoke again, his voice was different, tired, worn, carrying something heavy. I don't know what happened to Emma. I spent 20 years trying to find out, and I failed. That's the truth. He met my eyes. But I know Viktor Parteleu didn't kill her. Not because I proved his innocence, because I ran out of evidence to prove his guilt. There's a difference, and you need to understand it. What if you missed something? Then I missed it, and maybe you'll find it. He stood, grabbing his jacket from the back of the chair. But not by tipping off the richest man on the island that you're after him, not by making this personal in front of his lawyers. It is personal. I know, that's the problem. He walked toward the door, then stopped, one hand on the frame. Focus on Megan Collins, the evidence we have, the witnesses we haven't talked to. Do the job the right way, and maybe we'll find something real. He looked back at me. Or keep chasing Viktor and watch him bury this case in legal motions until we're both retired. He left. I sat there alone, listening to the hum of the station, the distant sound of Ray's voice on the phone. The afternoon light was fading, turning the windows gray. Burke was hiding something. I could feel it in the way he talked about Viktor, too careful, too defensive. He'd investigated the man 20 years ago and come up empty, but that didn't mean there was nothing to find. It meant he hadn't found it. Maybe he hadn't wanted to. I thought about what I knew. Viktor's company owned AlgoTech. Megan worked there. 20 years ago, Viktor's company owned DataCore. Emma worked there. Both women were dead, and Burke was telling me to look elsewhere. Why? I pulled out my notebook and wrote down everything from the interview with Viktor. His careful words, his calculated movements, the way he'd avoided my eyes when I mentioned Emma, the fear underneath the polish. He knew something. I was sure of it, and if Burke wouldn't help me find out what, I'd do it myself. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. Ray's looked up from his desk. Everything okay, detective? Fine, I'm going to follow up on some leads. Want me to? I've got it. I pushed through the front door and stepped into the cold evening air. The fog was coming back, creeping up from the harbor like something alive. Viktor Parteleu was connected to this. Burke could tell me to be careful all he wanted, but I knew what I'd seen in that man's eyes. Guilt, fear, the weight of a secret. And I was going to find out what he was hiding, even if I had to do it alone. I started where anyone starts when they want to know the truth about a place, with the people who remember. Ravenshore had a library, a small stone building near the ferry terminal that had been renovated a few years back with money from Viktor Parteleu. The irony wasn't lost on me. The librarian was a woman named Ruth Hensley, 60s, silver hair, the kind of face that remembered everything and judged none of it. I'd seen her around when I was a kid. She'd worked there even then, back when the building was smaller and the collection was mostly paperback mysteries and maritime histories. Sarah Hartley. She said my name like she was testing it. I heard you were back and that you joined the police. News travels fast. It's a small island. She adjusted her glasses. What brings you in? I'm looking for information about my family, the Hartleys. Old records, newspaper clippings, anything from around the time my sister died. Ruth studied me for a long moment, then she nodded. Follow me. She led me to a back room where the archives lived, filing cabinets, microfiche readers, boxes of old newspapers that hadn't been digitized yet, the smell of dust and aging paper. We have the Ravenshore Gazette going back to 1952, she said. Everything after 2010 is online. Before that, you'll have to dig. I don't mind digging. She left me alone. I spent 3 hours going through microfiche reels from the year Emma died, looking for anything I might have missed. The coverage of her murder was thin, a few articles, mostly focused on the investigation going nowhere. No suspects named, no theories offered, just the community is shocked and police are pursuing leads. But in the social pages from the months before Emma's death, I found something else. A photo of my mother at a charity gala, the annual Harbor Festival, 2006. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen, smiling in a way I barely recognized. And standing next to her, his hand on her elbow in a way that was almost, but not quite appropriate, was Viktor Parteleu. I stared at the image. Read the caption beneath it, * Margaret Hartley and Viktor Parteleu at the Harbor Festival Gala. Parteleu Industries was the evening's primary sponsor. * primary sponsor. Hand on her elbow, standing close, too close for strangers. I pulled more reels, found more photos. My mother at a ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new medical wing. Viktor beside her. My mother at the library renovation announcement. Viktor beside her. My mother at a reception at the Parteleu estate. Always together, always close, always with that same almost appropriate touching. Something cold settled in my chest. I found Ruth at the front desk. Did you know my mother? I asked. She looked up from her computer, her face shifted, sympathy, understanding, and something else, reluctance. A little, she volunteered here sometimes, helped with the children's reading program. Was she close with anyone from the Cliff families? Ruth's hands stilled on the keyboard. She didn't answer. Ruth, please. She looked at me for a long moment, then she sighed. There were rumors, she said quietly. Back then, about Margaret and Viktor Parteleu. What kind of rumors? The kind that don't matter now. She's been gone a long time, Sarah. Does it really? What kind? Ruth closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were full of something like pity. People said they were having an affair. I don't know if it was true. I don't know if anyone knows for certain. But they were seen together often, at events, at restaurants on the mainland, places where a married woman and a widower shouldn't be seen without people talking. She shook her head. Your father was working the boats back then, gone all the time, and Viktor, he could be charming when he wanted to be. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. My mother had an affair with Viktor Parteleu? I don't know, I'm telling you what people said. Ruth reached out and touched my hand. Sarah, your mother was a complicated woman. After Emma died, she wasn't the same. Nobody blamed her for anything. Everyone understood. I pulled my hand back. Thank you, I said. The words came out flat, automatic, for your help. Sarah, I was already walking toward the door. I sat in my truck outside the library, engine off, staring at nothing. My mother, Viktor Parteleu. The pieces clicked together in my head, forming a picture I didn't want to see. My mother at those events, my mother in those photographs. My mother who had killed herself 6 months after Emma died, leaving behind a husband and a daughter and a secret she'd taken to her grave. Had Emma known? Had Emma found out something about the affair, about Viktor, about whatever they'd been doing and gotten killed for it? Was that what Burke had been hiding? I pulled out my phone and called him. It rang twice before he answered. Hartley, I thought you were following leads. I am. My voice was steady somehow. We need to talk, in person. About Viktor Parteleu and my mother. Silence on the line, long enough that I thought he might have hung up. Where are you? He asked finally. Library parking lot. Stay there, I'm coming to you. He hung up. I sat in the truck and watched the fog roll in from the harbor, thinking about my mother and Viktor Parteleu and the 20 years of lies that had wrapped around my family like chains. Burke knew. He'd always known. And now I was going to make him tell me everything. Burke's truck pulled into the library parking lot 15 minutes later. He parked beside me and killed the engine but didn't get out. Through the windows, I could see his face, tired, resigned, like a man who'd been waiting for a conversation he didn't want to have. I got out and walked to his passenger door. He unlocked it. I climbed in. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The fog had thickened while I waited, turning the parking lot into a gray box. The library lights were soft blurs in the distance. "How much do you know?" Burke asked. "My mother and Viktor, the affair." I stared straight ahead. "Ruth Hensley told me, showed me the photos." Burke exhaled slowly. "I should have told you." "Yeah, you should have. I didn't know how, it wasn't my secret to tell. It's my mother, it's my family." I turned to face him. "Did Emma know?" Burke's hands tightened on the steering wheel, even though we weren't driving. "I think so. I could never prove it, but—" He shook his head. 6 months before she died, Emma started asking questions about Viktor, about the companies. She went through the personnel files at Data Corps looking for something. Her supervisor flagged it unauthorized access to employee records. What was she looking for? I don't know, maybe evidence of the affair, maybe something else. Burke's voice was heavy. 2 weeks later, she was dead. The words hung in the air between us. I let them settle. "You investigated Viktor." "I tried." Burke finally looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. "After Emma died, I spent months on him, talked to everyone who knew him, everyone who worked for him, pulled his financials, his travel records, everything I could get without a warrant. And when I couldn't get anything without a warrant, I tried to get warrants. What happened? Lawyers happened. Money happened." Burke laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Viktor Parteleu isn't just rich, he's connected. Every time I pushed, someone pushed back. The chief told me to focus on other leads. The DA said I didn't have enough for a warrant. His lawyers sent letters threatening harassment suits. So you stopped." "I didn't stop. I hit a wall." Burke's jaw tightened. "There's a difference." "Is there?" He looked away. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like something alive. "I could never tie Viktor to Emma's death," Burke said quietly. "He had alibis for the night she was killed, multiple witnesses, security footage. He was at a dinner party on the mainland, 40 miles away. Alibis can be faked. They can, but not that easily and not that completely." Burke shook his head. "I wanted it to be him, Sarah. God knows I wanted it. He was having an affair with your mother. He was connected to the company Emma worked for. He was rich and powerful, and everything about him smelled wrong. But I couldn't prove it. And eventually the case went cold, and I had to accept that maybe it wasn't him after all. You never told my father." "No. About the affair." "What would have been the point?" Burke's voice cracked slightly. "Emma was dead. Your mother was dead. Your father was barely holding on. Was I supposed to destroy the memory of his wife on top of everything else? I didn't have an answer to that." "I should have told you," Burke said. "When you came back, when you joined the department, I should have sat you down and explained everything, the affair, the investigation, why I could never close the case." He took a breath, but I didn't know how. I'd been carrying this for 20 years, and every time I looked at you, I saw Emma. I saw your mother. I saw everything I failed to do. Failed? I was supposed to solve it. His voice was raw now, stripped down to something honest. "That's my job, that's what I do, but I couldn't solve Emma's case, couldn't protect your family, couldn't even tell you the truth afterward." He met my eyes. "I failed, Sarah. I've been failing for 20 years, and I'm sorry." The silence that followed was different from before. Softer. The anger in my chest hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted, made room for something else. "You didn't fail," I said finally. "You ran into walls. That's not the same thing. Feels the same. I know. We sat there in the fog, 2 people carrying the same weight from different angles." "Viktor knew about Emma," I said. "At the interview, when I mentioned her name, he recognized it. He was lying when he said he didn't remember." "Probably. He's hiding something. He's been hiding something for 20 years. Burke's voice was steady now. "I just couldn't figure out what. Maybe we will this time." Burke looked at me. "This time, 2 women are dead, both connected to Viktor's companies, both stabbed." I turned to face him fully. 20 years ago, you were alone, now you're not." Something shifted in Burke's face. The wall that had been between us since my first day, the distance, the formality, the weight of things unsaid, cracked. "We do this right," he said. "By the book. No more confronting suspects alone, no more tipping our hand." Agreed. "And if we hit a wall again, then we find a way around it." I met his eyes. "Together." Burke held my gaze for a long moment, then he nodded. "Okay," he said. "Together." The fog outside was still thick, still pressing against the glass. But inside the truck, something had cleared. We had 20 years of secrets to unravel. It was time to start. The case file was thicker than I expected. Burke pulled it from the archives himself, a cardboard box labeled Hartley, Emma in faded marker, stored in the basement of the station where the cold cases lived. He set it on the conference room table and stepped back like it might bite. "I've been through this 100 times," he said. "Haven't looked at it in years." Fresh eyes. "Yeah." He didn't sound convinced. I opened the box. The smell hit me first: old paper, aging ink, the particular mustiness of something that had been sealed away too long. Inside were folders, photographs, evidence bags, interview transcripts, autopsy reports. 20 years of investigation compressed into cardboard. I started with the basics. The incident report, written by the first officer on scene. The photographs of the alley behind the cannery, dark, wet, industrial, and the photographs of Emma. I made myself look. She was on her back, arms at her sides, eyes open. Brown hair spread around her head like a halo. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, casual clothes, nothing that suggested she'd been planning anything special. Just a normal night that had ended in the worst possible way. 3 stab wounds to the torso, no defensive wounds on her hands. Either she hadn't seen it coming, or she'd known her killer well enough not to fight. I set the photographs aside and moved to the witness statements. There weren't many. No one had seen anything. No one had heard anything. The alley was in a dead zone, too far from the main streets for foot traffic, too close to the industrial sector for residents. "Who found her?" I asked. "Dock worker, guy named Mike Parsons. He's dead now, heart attack, 2018. Burke pulled a chair over and sat across from me. He was walking home from a late shift, cut through the alley as a shortcut, said he almost tripped over her. "Did you clear him?" "First thing. Solid alibi for the hours before. He was at the docks with 3 other guys, all of them confirmed it." Burke shook his head. "He was just wrong place, wrong time." I moved to the next section, Emma's background, her life laid out in police documents. Age at death, 18. Occupation, data entry clerk, Data Core Technologies. She'd started 6 months before she died, her first real job after community college. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady. She'd been saving up according to the notes. Wanted to leave the island eventually, wanted to see the world. My hand went to my neck. I forced it back down. "Data Core," I said. "Tell me about it." "Small company, maybe 50 employees. Did data processing, record management, that kind of thing." Burke rubbed his face. "They were a subsidiary of a larger firm. Back then, I didn't think much of it." "A subsidiary of whom?" Burke met my eyes. "Parteleu Industries." The confirmation settled into my chest like a stone. So Emma worked for Viktor, just like Megan worked for Viktor. For companies he owned, there's a difference. "Is there?" Burke didn't answer. I dug deeper into the file. Emma's personnel records from Data Core, her start date, her job description, her performance reviews. All normal, all unremarkable. A young woman doing entry-level work, nothing that should have gotten her killed. But then I found the incident report. It was buried in the miscellaneous section, almost like someone had tried to lose it. A complaint from Emma's supervisor, dated 3 weeks before her death. Unauthorized access to confidential employee files. Emma had been looking at records she wasn't supposed to see. What was she looking for? I asked. I never found out. Data Core closed ranks after she died, cited privacy concerns, refused to turn over specifics. Their lawyers were almost as aggressive as Viktor's. "But you must have theories." Burke was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I always thought it was about the affair. Emma finding out about her mother and Viktor, trying to dig up proof. Maybe she found something, maybe she confronted someone." He shrugged, but I could never confirm it. I stared at the incident report, 3 weeks before her death, unauthorized access, confidential files. What had Emma found? I pulled out my notebook and started mapping connections. On one side, Emma Hartley, Data Core Technologies, data processing and records management. Parteleu Industries subsidiary. On the other side, Megan Collins, AlgoTech, algorithm development and machine learning. Also a Parteleu subsidiary. 2 women, 2 companies, same parent corporation. Both worked with data in some capacity. Both were killed the same way. "What if it's not about the affair?" I said slowly. Burke leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "The affair gives Viktor motive for Emma. Maybe she found out, maybe she threatened to expose him. But what about Megan? She wasn't connected to my family. She wasn't investigating Viktor personally." I tapped my notebook. What if there's something else? Something both women stumbled into through their work? Like what? I don't know yet. I stared at the map I'd drawn, the lines connecting companies, victims, the man at the center of it all. But Data Core did data processing. AlgoTech did algorithms. Both worked for Viktor's surveillance division, right? Building systems that collect and analyze information. So what if Emma and Megan both saw something they weren't supposed to see? Something in the data, in the systems, in the way the companies operated. I met Burke's eyes. What if they were killed because of what they knew, not who they were connected to? Burke sat with that for a moment. His face was hard to read. It's a theory, he said finally. A good one, maybe, but we'd need access to the systems, the code, the internal operations. Parteleu's companies don't exactly open their doors for police inquiries. Then we find another way in. How? I looked at the case file spread across the table. 20 years of dead ends, walls, blocked doors. Maybe the answer wasn't in the file at all. Maybe it was in the work Emma and Megan had been doing, the systems they'd helped build, the data they'd helped process. I need to understand what these companies actually do, I said. Not the press release version, the technical version. What AlgoTech builds, what Data Core built, how it all fits together. You know anyone in tech? I thought about it. My years in the city, the cases I'd worked, the people I'd met. Maybe, I said. Let me make some calls. Burke nodded and stood. I'll leave you to it. The file's yours as long as you need it. He paused at the door. Sarah, I looked up. I hope you find something, he said quietly. God knows I tried. Then he was gone and I was alone with Emma's case file and 20 years of unanswered questions. I pulled the map closer and started drawing new lines. Data Core, AlgoTech, Parteleu Industries. Somewhere in that web there was an answer. I just had to find it. This time, I didn't go through the front door. Viktor Parteleu had a routine. I learned it by watching, 2 days of sitting in my truck on the cliff road, tracking his movements. He left the office at 5:30 every evening, drove to a restaurant called the Lighthouse on the mainland, ate dinner alone, and returned to his mansion by 8 o'clock. Predictable. The kind of schedule that came from having no one to surprise you and nowhere unexpected to be. I caught him in the parking lot of the Lighthouse, halfway between his car and the entrance. The sun was going down, painting the sky in shades of orange and gray. Mr. Parteleu? He turned. The recognition took a moment, then his face went carefully blank. Detective Hartley, I thought my lawyers had established protocols for. This isn't official. I kept my distance, hands visible, posture relaxed. I'm not here to arrest you or accuse you of anything. I just want to talk. About my mother. The blankness cracked, just for a moment, a flash of something that might have been pain or regret or the memory of both. I don't think that's a good idea. Neither do I, but I'm going to do it anyway. I took a step closer. You can have dinner with me and answer my questions, or I can keep showing up in parking lots, your choice. Viktor studied me for a long moment, then he sighed. Fine, one dinner. One conversation. He gestured toward the restaurant. After you. The Lighthouse was exactly the kind of place Viktor Parteleu would eat alone, upscale without being ostentatious, quiet, expensive. The host greeted him by name and led us to a corner booth with a view of the water. I didn't order food. Viktor asked for his usual, some kind of fish, I didn't catch the name, and a glass of wine that probably cost more than my weekly grocery bill. You wanted to talk, he said. Talk, the affair, you and my mother. His hand tightened slightly on the stem of his wine glass. That was a long time ago. 20 years, same as my sister's murder. If you're implying, I'm not implying anything, I'm trying to understand. I kept my voice even. When did it start? Viktor took a long sip of wine. When he set the glass down, his face had settled into something like resignation. 2004. Margaret was volunteering at the library. I was funding the renovation. We met at the groundbreaking ceremony. He stared at the table. She was, not what I expected. Most people on this island either want something from me or resent me for having it. Margaret didn't seem to want anything at all. So you pursued her. We pursued each other. His voice was quiet. I'm not going to make excuses. She was married, I knew that. But her husband was gone most of the time, fishing boats, long hauls to the mainland. She was lonely, I was lonely. He shrugged. It happened. And Emma? I knew Emma was Margaret's daughter. I knew she needed work after she finished school. Viktor finally met my eyes. I gave her a job at Data Core because Margaret asked me to. It was a favor for a woman I cared about, that's all. Did Emma know about the affair? Something flickered in Viktor's face. I think she suspected. Near the end, she started asking questions about me, about the company, about how I knew her mother. He shook his head. I don't know what Margaret told her. I don't know if she confirmed it or denied it, but Emma was looking at me differently in those last weeks, like she'd figured something out. And then she was killed. Yes, the word came out rough. And then she was killed. I watched his face carefully. He wasn't performing grief, or if he was good enough at it that I couldn't tell the difference. Did you have anything to do with her death? Viktor's eyes snapped to mine. No. Someone connected to your company? No. Did you know what she found when she accessed those confidential files? He hesitated, just for a second. What files? Personnel records at Data Core. Unauthorized access 3 weeks before she died. Viktor shook his head slowly. I didn't know about that. Data Core was one of dozens of subsidiaries. I wasn't involved in day-to-day operations. He took another sip of wine. If Emma was looking for something, I don't know what it was. Do you know who killed her? No. His voice cracked slightly. God, no. If I knew, don't you think I would have? He stopped, took a breath, composed himself. After Emma died, your mother, she was never the same. She blamed herself. Blamed me, I think, for giving Emma the job in the first place. And then 6 months later, she was gone too. The words hit harder than I expected. I'd known the timeline. I hadn't expected him to acknowledge it so directly. You were with my mother when she died? No, she'd stopped speaking to me by then, stopped answering calls, stopped coming to events. Viktor stared at his wine glass. The last time I saw her was at Emma's funeral. She looked through me like I wasn't there. I didn't know what to say to that. Viktor looked up. His eyes were wet, not quite crying, but close. I didn't kill Emma, detective. I didn't order anyone to kill her. I don't know who did or why. He leaned forward. But I loved your mother, and I have spent 20 years wondering if I could have done something, anything to prevent what happened to your family. I stared at him, trying to read the truth behind the words. He seemed genuine, confused, not defensive, grieving, not guilty. But Viktor Parteleu hadn't become the richest man on Ravenshore by being easy to read. If I find evidence that you're lying, I said slowly, I will come for you. Lawyers, money, connections, none of it will matter. I know. He met my eyes. I'm not lying. I stood. Thanks for the conversation. Detective. His voice stopped me at the edge of the booth. For what it's worth, I hope you find whoever did this. Emma deserved better. Your whole family did. I didn't respond. I walked out of the restaurant and into the cold evening air where the fog was starting to roll in from the water. Viktor Parteleu wasn't what I'd expected. He was softer, more human, more wounded by what had happened than I'd imagined. But that didn't mean he was innocent. It just meant the truth was more complicated than I'd hoped. The next week was a grind. Burke and I worked through Megan Collins's life methodically, ticking boxes, chasing leads, hitting walls. It was the part of detective work nobody talked about, the hours of interviews that went nowhere, the paper trails that dead-ended, the witnesses who saw nothing and knew less. Megan's ex-boyfriend was first on the list. A guy named Kyle Brennan worked at the hardware store on Main Street. They dated for 2 years before splitting up about 18 months ago. The kind of breakup that was mutual and amicable, according to everyone who knew them. She just wanted different things, Kyle told us in the back room of the hardware store, surrounded by boxes of nails and power tools. She was into her work, computers, algorithms, stuff I didn't understand. I wanted to settle down, maybe start a family. He shrugged. We grew apart. That's all. Any anger? Arguments? Nothing serious. We still said hi when we passed each other on the street. His face twisted. I can't believe someone would hurt her. She was a good person, you know? We checked his alibi. He'd been at a buddy's house watching the game the night Megan was killed. 4 witnesses, all confirmed. Strike one. The coworker with a grudge came next. A guy named Peter Morrison, junior developer at AlgoTech. According to the HR files, Megan had filed a complaint against him 6 months ago, something about him taking credit for her work on a project. Morrison was defensive from the start. That complaint was bullshit, he said, arms crossed, seated in the conference room at AlgoTech while Marcus Webb watched from the corner. Megan was paranoid, always thought people were out to get her. Were they? No, she was just difficult to work with, kept to herself, didn't share information, acted like everyone was trying to steal her ideas. He shook his head. I didn't take credit for anything. The project was a team effort. She couldn't accept that. Where were you the night she was killed? Home, alone. He caught our look. I know how that sounds, but I have security footage. My building has cameras in the hallways. You can check. We checked. The footage showed Morrison entering his apartment at 6:47 p.m. and not leaving until the next morning. Time-stamped, date-stamped, verified by the building manager. Strike 2. We talked to neighbors, friends, acquaintances. We pulled phone records, email logs, credit card statements. Megan Collins had lived a quiet life, work, the diner, home. No secret boyfriends, no gambling debts, no enemies that anyone could identify. She was, by all accounts, exactly what she appeared to be, a tech worker who kept to herself and didn't bother anyone, which made her murder all the more senseless. "We're missing something," I said to Burke on Friday afternoon. We were in the conference room, surrounded by evidence boards and coffee cups. The walls were covered in photos, timelines, connection maps, all of it pointing nowhere. "We're missing everything," Burke said. "No motive, no weapon, no witnesses. Whoever did this knew what they were doing, or got lucky. Nobody gets this lucky." I stared at the board. Megan's photo in the center, surrounded by faces, her ex, her coworkers, her neighbors. Viktor Parteleu in the corner, connected by dotted lines to AlgoTech, to data core, to everything. "Viktor keeps coming up," I said. "He owns half the businesses on this island. His name comes up for everything. That's convenient, or it's just reality." Burke leaned back in his chair. "Look, I know you want this to be about him. I wanted the same thing 20 years ago, but wanting doesn't make it true." Before I could respond, Chief Martinez appeared in the doorway. She was in her 50s, gray-streaked hair, the kind of face that had seen too much and stopped being surprised by any of it. "Detectives, my office, now." Chief Martinez closed the door behind us and leaned against her desk. "The mayor called." Burke and I exchanged a look. "He's getting pressure from the community. Business owners, tourist board, the usual suspects." The chief's voice was flat. "They want this case closed. They want to know their island is safe." "We're working it as fast as we can," I said. "I know you are, that's not the point." Martinez rubbed her temples. "The point is that Viktor Parteleu's name has been circulating. People are talking. Reporters from the mainland are sniffing around. If this becomes a story about one of our most prominent citizens being a murder suspect—" "He's not a suspect," Burke said. "He's a person of interest. The press won't care about the distinction. Then the press can." "Burke." Martinez's voice cut him off. "I'm not telling you to stop investigating. I'm telling you to be careful. Parteleu has resources. Lawyers. The kind of people who make cases disappear in legal proceedings that drag on for years." She looked at me. "If you're going to bring him in, you better have something solid. Otherwise, you're just giving him ammunition to bury this investigation." "Understood," I said. Martinez nodded. "Find me something real and do it soon." We walked back to the conference room in silence. "She's right," Burke said finally. "If Viktor's involved, we need more than suspicion. We need evidence. The connection is there. Both victims worked for his companies. Both were killed the same way. Connection isn't evidence. Correlation isn't causation." Burke stopped at the doorway. "Look, I want this solved as much as you do. More maybe, but we can't force it. If we push too hard without something solid, the whole thing falls apart." I stared at the evidence board, at Megan's face, at Emma's face buried in the cold case file beneath it, at Viktor Parteleu in the corner, connected to everything and implicated in nothing. The answer was there somewhere. I could feel it like an itch I couldn't scratch, but every lead we followed dead-ended. Every thread we pulled unraveled, and the pressure to close the case was building. "Tomorrow," I said. "We start fresh tomorrow." Burke nodded and headed home. I stayed, staring at the board until the lights in the station dimmed and the silence pressed in. Somewhere on this island, a killer was walking free, and I was no closer to finding them than I'd been a week ago. The break came on a Tuesday. I was at my desk, staring at the same files I'd been staring at for days, when Ray's knocked on the doorframe. "Detective Hartley, got someone at the front who wants to talk, says he has information about the Collins murder." "Who?" "Guy named Tommy Whitmore, works at the fish market." I looked at Burke. He shrugged. "Send him in." Tommy Whitmore was in his 60s, weathered face, hands rough from decades of scaling fish. He sat across from us in the interview room, twisting his cap between his fingers. "I should have come in sooner," he said. I wasn't sure if it mattered." "Tell us what you saw," Burke said. "It was about a week before that woman died. The tech one. I was closing up the market, must have been around 9 o'clock. Tommy took a breath. I saw her in the parking lot behind the cannery. She was talking to someone. Who? Danny Vance. The name hit like a cold splash. Danny Vance was known around Ravenshore, known and avoided. He lived in the slum housing near the harbor, had a record for petty theft and assault, spent more time drinking than working. The kind of guy mothers warned their kids about. Are you sure it was him? I asked. Positive. I've seen Danny 100 times, we all have. Tommy shook his head. They were arguing about something, I couldn't hear what, but Danny was in her face, pointing his finger, looking mean. She looked scared. Did it get physical? Not that I saw. She walked away after a minute, got in her car and left. Danny stood there watching her go. Tommy paused. I didn't think much of it at the time. Danny argues with everybody, but when I heard she was dead. Burke and I exchanged a look. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Burke asked. I don't know, didn't want to get involved, I guess. Danny's got friends, rough people. I figured someone else would say something. Tommy looked down at his hands. But nobody did, and that woman's still dead, so here I am. We took his statement, got his contact information, and let him go. As soon as the door closed behind him, Burke was on his feet. Danny Vance, I know him. Petty shit, stolen property, bar fights, that kind of thing. Never violent like this, but he's capable. Everyone's capable, given the right circumstances. We pulled Danny Vance's record. It was long, a decade of minor charges, a few months in county jail, nothing that suggested murder, but there were gaps. Times when he dropped off the radar, stopped getting arrested, stopped showing up in the usual places. What was he doing during those periods? I asked. Could be anything. Laying low, working odd jobs, who knows? Burke tapped the file. But it's worth asking. We went to Danny's place, a rundown house near the harbor that looked like it hadn't been painted since the 80s. He answered the door in a stained undershirt, eyes bloodshot, smelling like last night's whiskey. What do you want? Danny Vance, Detective Burke, Detective Hartley, we need to ask you some questions. About what? Megan Collins. Something flickered in his face. Fear, maybe, or recognition. Don't know any Megan. That's interesting, I said, because we have a witness who saw you arguing with her a week before she was killed. Danny's jaw tightened. Witness is lying. Want to come down to the station and tell us about it? For a moment, I thought he'd run. His eyes darted past us toward the alley, calculating distances, then his shoulders slumped. Fine, whatever. In the interview room, Danny was defensive, sullen, and not particularly smart. He denied knowing Megan at first, then admitted they'd talked once or twice, then finally acknowledged the argument when we pressed. She owed me money, he said. I sold her something, nothing illegal, just stuff. She said she'd pay me back, but she never did. What kind of stuff? Electronics, old computers, parts, that kind of thing. She was always looking for tech shit. And you argued about this a week before she died? I was trying to get my money, that's all. Danny's voice cracked. I didn't kill her, I'm not. He stopped, breathing hard. I didn't do it. Where were you the night she was killed? Home, sleeping, I don't have. He stopped. I live alone, nobody can prove I was there. Burke leaned forward. That's not a good answer, Danny. It's the truth. We didn't have enough to hold him, not yet. But the next day, things escalated. Rays found the knife. It was in a dumpster behind the cannery, wrapped in a plastic bag, covered in what the lab later confirmed was human blood. The blade was 6 inches long, serrated edge, consistent with Megan Collins's wounds. And 3 hours after that, another witness came forward. A woman named Claire Mendez who lived near Danny's place. She said she'd seen him coming home late the night of the murder, clothes wet, looking freaked out. This is coming together fast, Burke said that evening. We were in the conference room, staring at the evidence board that now had Danny Vance's photo at the center. Too fast. Burke looked at me. You think it's not real? I think a week ago we had nothing, and now we have a weapon, 2 witnesses, and a suspect with no alibi. I shook my head. That doesn't happen. It does happen. Cases break. Witnesses come forward when they see we're serious. Or someone's making it happen. Burke was quiet for a moment. You think Danny's being framed? I don't know. I stared at Danny's photo, the bloodshot eyes, the rough face, the lifetime of bad choices written in every line. He fits. He's got a record, he's got a connection to the victim, he's got no way to prove his innocence. But, it's too easy. I turned to face Burke. Everything about this case has been hard. Walls at every turn, dead ends everywhere. And suddenly it's easy. A knife in a dumpster, 2 witnesses out of nowhere. Burke didn't answer. He just stared at the board, his face unreadable. The evidence said Danny Vance was our guy. My gut said something else entirely. The lab results came back the next morning. The blood on the knife was Megan Collins's. The blade matched the wound pattern exactly, and there was a partial fingerprint on the handle, smudged, but enough points for a possible match. Run it against Danny Vance, the chief said. We did. It matched. Danny Vance sat in interview room 2, looking smaller than he had the day before. The defiance had drained out of him, replaced by something that looked like resignation, or maybe fear. I sat across from him while Burke watched from behind the glass. We decided I would take lead. Sometimes a female detective got different responses than a male one, and Danny was the kind of guy who might let his guard down around a woman. Danny, we have your fingerprint on the murder weapon. He stared at me. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. That's not possible. It is possible. It happened. I spread the lab report on the table between us. Your print. Megan's blood, the knife that killed her. I didn't, his voice broke. I sold her stuff, that's all. I never touched her. I never touched any knife. Then how did your fingerprint get on it? I don't know. The words came out ragged, desperate. I don't know how. Someone must have. He stopped, took a breath. Someone setting me up. It was what everyone said. Every guilty person, every innocent person, everyone who found themselves on the wrong side of evidence. Someone setting me up. The words were meaningless, but something in his voice made me pause. Who would set you up, Danny? I don't know, I don't. He ran his hands through his hair, leaving it standing in wild spikes. I'm not smart enough for this. You can see that, right? I can barely read. I work odd jobs, I drink too much, I sell shit I probably shouldn't sell. But I'm not a killer. I've never killed anyone. I watched his face. The fear was real, too raw to be performed, and the confusion, that was real too. He genuinely didn't understand how this was happening. Tell me about your relationship with Megan Collins. There was no relationship. She came to me maybe 3-4 times over the past year, wanted to buy old computers, hard drives, tech stuff. I get that kind of thing sometimes. People throw away all sorts of shit when they upgrade. She paid cash, didn't ask questions. He shrugged weakly. It was easy money. And the argument the witness saw? She owed me $50, said she'd pay me the next time, but there was never a next time. Danny's voice went flat. I'm not proud of it. I got in her face, but that's all I did. I didn't hurt her. The witness says you looked angry. I was angry. Being angry isn't the same as killing someone. Where did you get the things you sold her? The computers, the hard drives. Danny hesitated. Around. Dumpsters, estate sales, people who want to get rid of stuff without the hassle. Any particular sources? A few guys, I don't. He stopped, his face changed. Wait, there's this one guy. He started coming around about 6 months ago, gives me stuff to sell, takes a cut of the profits. Good quality stuff too, better than the usual garbage. Who? I don't know his real name. He just calls himself Pete. Danny's brow furrowed. Middle-aged, glasses, kind of nerdy looking, said he worked at one of the tech companies. Something cold moved through my chest. Can you describe him more specifically? I don't know. Average height, graying hair, forgettable face. Danny shrugged. The kind of guy you pass on the street and don't notice. Forgettable. I thought of the man I'd met at AlgoTech, the one who'd interrupted our conversation with Marcus Webb. Helpful, polite, forgettable. Pier Aberdeen. This Pete, I said carefully. Did he know you sold stuff to Megan? Yeah, he's the one who introduced us. Danny's eyes widened. He said she was looking for old tech, that she was good for the money. He set the whole thing up. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. When's the last time you saw Pete? Danny thought about it. Maybe a week before the murder. He came by, gave me some stuff to sell, asked how things were going with Megan. His face went pale. Oh God, you don't think he? I don't think anything yet, but I was thinking plenty. Burke met me in the hallway after I left the interview room. You heard every word. His face was troubled. Pier Aberdeen? Danny's description fits, and Aberdeen worked with Megan at AlgoTech. He knew her interests, could have set up the introduction. That's circumstantial at best. It's a thread. I started walking toward the conference room. Danny said this Pete introduced him to Megan. If we can confirm that Aberdeen was Pete, if we can prove he orchestrated that relationship, then we have motive to look at him more closely. Burke fell into step beside me. But it doesn't explain the fingerprint on the knife. Danny's print, not Aberdeen's. What if Aberdeen planted it, gave Danny something to hold that he later attached to the knife? Fingerprints can be transferred. Burke stopped walking. That's a lot of work, a lot of planning. This whole thing has been planned. The knife shows up in a dumpster exactly when we need evidence. 2 witnesses come forward exactly when we need testimony. It's too clean, Burke, too convenient. The chief's going to want an arrest. Then give her one, give her Danny Vance. The words tasted bitter. But I want to keep digging. If someone framed him, I want to know who and why. Burke studied me for a long moment. You think Danny's innocent? I thought about the man in the interview room. The bloodshot eyes, the fear, the genuine confusion about how his life had fallen apart so completely. I think he's too stupid to have done this, I said. And I think whoever did do it is counting on us not looking past the obvious. Burke nodded slowly. All right, we build the case against Danny for the chief, but we keep our eyes open. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. He started walking again. If you're wrong, Danny Vance is a murderer walking free while we chase shadows. And if I'm right, then the real killer is still out there, watching. The thought settled into my bones like ice. The chief called us into her office at 4:00 p.m. The mayor was already there. Mayor Edward Walsh was in his 50s, polished in the way politicians always are, perfect hair, careful smile, the kind of confidence that comes from never having to doubt yourself. He'd been running Ravenshore for 15 years, riding a platform of modernization and progress. In practice, that meant courting tech companies, improving tourism, and keeping anything unpleasant out of the headlines. A murder was about as unpleasant as it got. Detectives, Walsh nodded to us as we entered. I wanted to personally thank you for your work on this case. The case isn't closed yet, I said, but you have a suspect. Walsh glanced at Chief Martinez. Danny Vance, the evidence seems compelling. Evidence is one piece of the puzzle, Burke said. We're still building the case. Of course, of course. Walsh leaned forward, hands clasped. But the community needs closure. Business owners are concerned, tourist season is approaching, and people are nervous. A murder on Ravenshore, it's unprecedented. I bit back the response I wanted to give. It wasn't unprecedented. My sister had been murdered here 20 years ago. We understand the pressure, Burke said diplomatically. But rushing an arrest can backfire. If we move before we're ready, I'm not asking you to rush. Walsh's smile didn't waver. I'm asking you to consider the timeline. How much longer do you need? Chief Martinez stepped in. The DA says we have enough for an arrest warrant. The fingerprint, the witnesses, the circumstantial evidence, it's solid. Then what's the hesitation? I looked at Burke. He looked at me. Neither of us spoke. There are still loose ends, I said finally. Questions we haven't answered. What questions? How Danny Vance knew Megan Collins, why he would kill her over a $50 debt, whether anyone else might have been involved. Walsh's brow furrowed. Are you suggesting there's another suspect? I'm suggesting we haven't fully investigated every angle. Detective, Walsh's voice hardened slightly. I appreciate thoroughness. But there comes a point where additional investigation becomes delay for its own sake. You have a suspect with motive, means, and opportunity. You have physical evidence tying him to the crime. You have witnesses placing him with the victim shortly before her death. The timing feels convenient. Walsh cut me off. Cases break, that's how investigations work. You chase dead ends until something connects, and then suddenly you have answers. He stood, buttoning his jacket. I trust Chief Martinez to make the right call, but the community is watching. They want to know their island is safe. He left without waiting for a response. The door clicked shut behind him. Chief Martinez exhaled slowly. I know what you're thinking, she said, and I don't entirely disagree, but Walsh has a point. We have evidence, we have a suspect. At some point, we have to act. Even if the suspect is wrong, I asked, even if we have doubts. Martinez met my eyes. The system has safeguards. If Danny Vance is innocent, his lawyer will find the holes. The trial will reveal the truth. And if it doesn't, then we failed. But we fail either way if we let a murderer walk because we weren't confident enough to act. She sat back in her chair. Arrest warrants are being prepared. We move on Danny Vance tomorrow morning. I found Burke in the parking lot, leaning against his truck, staring at nothing. This doesn't feel right, I said. I know. Danny Vance didn't kill Megan Collins. You don't know that. I know it. I stood next to him, looking out at the gray afternoon sky. Everything about this case has been hard. Walls, dead ends, nothing connecting, and suddenly it's easy. The weapon shows up, witnesses appear, everything lines up perfectly. Sometimes cases break. This one didn't break, it was handed to us. I turned to face him. Someone wanted us to find Danny Vance. Someone pointed us right at him. Burke was quiet for a long moment. Even if you're right, he said finally, what do we do about it? The chiefs made her call. The mayor's breathing down everyone's neck. We don't have another suspect, we barely have a theory. Then we dig faster. Dig where? I thought about Danny's description. Middle-aged, glasses, nerdy-looking, said he worked at one of the tech companies. Aberdeen, I said. Pier Aberdeen from AlgoTech. Danny's description of Pete fits him. He knew Megan, he works in tech, he's the right age. That's thin. It's all we have. Burke shook his head slowly. Even if Aberdeen is this Pete, even if he introduced Danny to Megan, that doesn't make him a killer. It makes him a guy who knew people. It makes him a connection we didn't have before. It makes him a thread, and threads break. Burke finally looked at me. Listen, Hartley, I've been doing this a long time. I've seen cases that felt wrong turn out to be exactly what they looked like, and I've seen cases that felt right fall apart completely. Which one is this? I don't know, that's the point. He pushed off from the truck. We arrest Danny Vance tomorrow, that's what's happening, but after that, I'll help you look into Aberdeen, quietly, off the books. Why? Because you might be right, and because if you are, we're about to put an innocent man in prison. His jaw tightened. I've had 20 years to live with one failure. I don't need another. He got in his truck and drove away. I stood alone in the parking lot, watching the fog roll in from the harbor. Tomorrow, we would arrest Danny Vance for murder. The case would close. The community would relax. The mayor would give interviews about swift justice. And somewhere, the real killer would be watching, waiting to see if anyone would notice. We hit Danny Vance's place at 6:00 a.m., 4 officers, Burke and me. The morning was cold and gray, fog still clinging to the harbor like it hadn't decided whether to lift or stay. Danny's house looked worse in the early light, the peeling paint, the sagging porch, the windows that hadn't been cleaned in years. I knocked, waited, knocked again. The door opened slowly. Danny stood there in boxers and a t-shirt, hair wild, eyes barely focusing. What the? Danny Vance. I held up the warrant. You're under arrest for the murder of Megan Collins. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. No. The word came out choked, desperate. No, I didn't, you know I didn't. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand these rights? This isn't right. His voice cracked. You talked to me, you saw my face. You know I didn't do this. The officers moved in. Danny didn't resist, he just stood there, stunned, as they cuffed his hands behind his back. His eyes found mine and held. You're making a mistake, he said quietly. Whoever really did this is going to get away with it. I didn't respond. I couldn't. They led him to the patrol car. The neighbors were watching now, faces in windows, people on porches, the quiet judgment of a community that had already decided Danny Vance was guilty. He'd always been trouble. Of course it was him. I watched them put him in the back seat, watched the door close, watched the car pull away, lights off, heading toward the station where he would be processed and held for trial. Burke appeared beside me. It's done? Yeah, you don't look relieved. I'm not. We stood there in silence as the other officers dispersed, as the neighbors went back inside, as the street returned to its normal emptiness. His face, I said finally. Did you see his face when they cuffed him? I saw it. That wasn't the face of a guilty man. Guilty men and innocent men look the same when they're scared. Burke started walking toward the truck. The evidence is solid. The DA's confident. Either Danny Vance killed Megan Collins or someone went to extraordinary lengths to make it look like he did. Which do you believe? Burke didn't answer. He just got in the truck and waited for me to join him. The station was buzzing when we got back. Word had already spread. The murder case was closed. The suspect was in custody. Everyone was congratulating everyone, shaking hands, acting like justice had been served. Chief Martinez caught me in the hallway. Good work, Hartley. Quick resolution, solid evidence. This is exactly what the department needed. Thank you, Chief. The mayor's planning a press conference this afternoon. He wants you and Burke there, standing behind him when he makes the announcement. I don't think it's not a request. Martinez's voice softened slightly. I know this case was personal for you. Emma's connection to the victim's employer, all of it. You should be proud of what you accomplished. I didn't accomplish anything. The evidence fell into our laps. That's how cases break sometimes. She patted my shoulder. Take the win, Hartley. They don't come often enough. She walked away. I stood in the hallway, watching officers move past, listening to the buzz of conversation, feeling nothing that resembled victory. Danny Vance's arraignment was at noon. I went. Sat in the back of the courtroom, watching the proceedings like they were happening to someone else. Danny looked different in the orange jumpsuit. Smaller, defeated. His public defender, a young woman who clearly had too many cases and not enough time, entered a plea of not guilty. The judge set bail at $500,000. Danny didn't have $500. He wasn't going anywhere. When they let him out, he looked around the courtroom. His eyes found me, and for a moment, something passed between us. Not anger, not accusation. Just a terrible, resigned understanding. He knew he was innocent. He also knew it didn't matter. The press conference happened at 3:00 p.m. on the steps of the town hall. Mayor Walsh stood at the podium, flanked by Chief Martinez, Burke, and me. The cameras were rolling, the reporters were waiting, and Walsh was delivering exactly the speech everyone expected. Today, we can assure the citizens of Ravenshore that justice is being served. The suspect in the tragic murder of Megan Collins has been apprehended, thanks to the tireless work of our police department. I tuned him out, watched the crowd instead, the faces of townspeople who wanted to believe their island was safe. The reporters who would file stories about a case solved, a community healed. And then, at the edge of the crowd, I saw him, Pier Aberdeen. He was standing apart from everyone else, half hidden by a lamppost, watching the press conference with an expression I couldn't quite read. When his eyes met mine, he smiled, a small, polite smile that meant nothing. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd like he'd never been there at all. Forgettable. The word echoed in my head as the mayor finished his speech, as the crowd applauded, as the cameras stopped rolling. Danny Vance was in jail for a murder he didn't commit, and the real killer was walking free, watching it all unfold exactly as he'd planned. The days that followed were strange. The station settled back into its usual rhythms. The press coverage faded. People stopped talking about Megan Collins on the streets and started talking about the weather, the fishing, the approaching tourist season. The murder became yesterday's news, something terrible that had happened and been resolved, filed away in the collective memory like a bad dream. I was praised everywhere I went. Mrs. Chen at the diner gave me free coffee. Officer Reyes shook my hand every morning. The chief nodded at me in the hallways with something that looked like approval. I'd helped close a murder case in under 3 weeks, record time for Ravenshore. Burke was quiet. He came to work, did his job, went home. We didn't talk about Danny Vance. We didn't talk about Pier Aberdeen. We didn't talk about the case at all. Closed case, he said once when I tried to bring it up. That's what the paperwork says. That's what everyone believes. Is it what you believe? He didn't answer. I couldn't sleep. Night after night, I lay in my apartment, staring at the ceiling, running through the evidence in my head. The timeline, the witnesses, the knife in the dumpster, the fingerprint, everything pointed to Danny Vance. Everything fit, but everything fitting was the problem. Cases didn't fit this cleanly. Real murders were messy, missing evidence, conflicting testimony, loose ends that never tied up. Danny Vance's case had none of that. It was too perfect. Constructed. On the 5th night, I got out of bed at 2:00 a.m. and started writing. I covered 3 pages of notebook paper, drawing the timeline from the beginning, Megan's murder, the initial investigation, the dead ends, the sudden break, the witness from the fish market, then the knife, then the second witness, then the fingerprint match. Everything after Tommy Whitmore came forward had happened in rapid succession, like dominoes falling in a preset pattern. Who set up the dominoes? I pulled Danny's interview transcript from the case file I'd kept at home. Read through it again. Asterisk, there's this one guy. He started coming around about 6 months ago. Gives me stuff to sell, takes a cut of the profits. Asterisk, asterisk, middle-aged, glasses, kind of nerdy looking. Said he worked at one of the tech companies. Asterisk, asterisk, he's the one who introduced us. Asterisk, Pier Aberdeen fit the description. Pier Aberdeen worked at AlgoTech. Pier Aberdeen knew Megan Collins, but Danny never gave me a last name, never confirmed it was Aberdeen. All I had was a description that could match half the middle-aged men on the island. I needed more. The next morning, I went back to AlgoTech. Not officially. I was off duty, dressed in civilian clothes, hoping to blend in. The receptionist recognized me but didn't ask questions when I said I was following up on a few loose ends. "Mr. Webb is in meetings all morning," she said, "but I can see if someone else can help you." "That's all right. I was actually hoping to talk to Pier Aberdeen. Is he in?" She checked her screen. "Mr. Aberdeen isn't in today, working from home according to the schedule." "Does he do that often, work from home?" "Sometimes. He's senior staff, they have more flexibility." She smiled apologetically. "Would you like to leave a message?" "No, thank you. I left." Aberdeen's address was in the HR files we'd pulled during the initial investigation. A house on the mainland side of the bridge, one of the quieter neighborhoods where tech workers who didn't want to live on the island proper settled down. I drove there, parked down the street, sat in my truck and watched. The house was unremarkable. Single story, well-maintained lawn, a sedan in the driveway. Nothing that said murderer, nothing that said anything at all. But that was the point, wasn't it? Pier Aberdeen was forgettable. Helpful, polite, blended into the background. The kind of man you'd pass 100 times and never remember. The perfect cover for someone with something to hide. I sat there for an hour. Aberdeen didn't leave the house. Didn't appear in any windows. The neighborhood was quiet, empty, the kind of place where people minded their own business. Eventually, I drove away. That night, I spread everything across my kitchen table. The case file, the timeline, Danny's interview, my notes from the AlgoTech visits. The research I'd done on Pier Aberdeen, which amounted to almost nothing. 20 years at the company, no criminal record, no red flags, clean, too clean. I thought about what I knew. Megan Collins had worked at AlgoTech. She'd been killed and left in an alley, stabbed multiple times. 20 years ago, Emma had worked at DataCore. She'd been killed and left in an alley, stabbed multiple times. Both companies were Parteleu subsidiaries. Both worked on surveillance technology. Both women had been murdered the same way, and Pier Aberdeen had been at AlgoTech for 20 years, long enough to have known Emma. I sat back, staring at the papers. It was circumstantial. Speculation. Nothing I could take to the chief without looking like I was grasping at straws. But it was also the first thing in this whole case that felt true. Pier Aberdeen was connected to both murders. I just had to prove it. The itch wouldn't stop. It was there when I woke up. There when I went to work. There when I sat at my desk pretending to focus on other cases, the petty thefts and domestic disputes that were Ravenshore's usual fare. The Megan Collins case was closed, the paperwork filed, the suspect awaiting trial. But my brain refused to let it go, so I kept digging. Quietly. Off the record. On my own time, with files I'd copied before they went into archives, I started with the evidence timeline. Day 1, Megan's body found, no witnesses, no weapon, no leads. Days 2 through 8, we canvass, interview, chase dead ends, nothing connects. Day 9, Tommy Whitmore comes forward. Identifies Danny Vance as the man arguing with Megan. Day 10, the knife is found in a dumpster behind the cannery. Day 11, Claire Mendez comes forward. Places Danny near his home on the night of the murder, looking freaked out. Day 12, fingerprint match comes back. Danny's print on the handle. Day 13, arrest. 8 days of nothing, then 5 days of everything. The break was too clean, too sudden, like someone had flipped a switch. I pulled Tommy Whitmore's witness statement and read it again. He said he'd been closing up the fish market when he saw Megan and Danny arguing. But the fish market was 3 blocks from the parking lot behind the cannery. At night. In the dark. How had he seen them clearly enough to identify Danny? I checked the lighting in that area. 2 streetlights, both on the far side of the parking lot. The cannery side was in shadow. Tommy had seen a man arguing with a woman. He'd assumed it was Danny because Danny was the obvious suspect, the town troublemaker, the guy everyone knew and avoided. But had he actually seen Danny's face? Or had he seen a figure that matched what he expected to see? The knife was the bigger problem. Found in a dumpster 4 blocks from the crime scene, wrapped in a plastic bag, covered in Megan's blood. The blade matched the wound pattern. Danny's fingerprint was on the handle, but the timing was wrong. We'd searched that area on day 2. A full sweep, every dumpster, every alley, every hiding spot. The knife wasn't there. We would have found it, which meant someone had placed it there between day 2 and day 10. After the initial search, when it would be discovered exactly when it needed to be discovered. Planted evidence. I wrote that down and circled it 3 times. Claire Mendez was the weakest link. She lived 2 houses down from Danny. She'd come forward on day 11, claiming she'd seen Danny returning home late on the night of the murder, clothes wet, looking scared. But her statement had inconsistencies. She said she'd been looking out her window because she couldn't sleep, but her window faced the opposite direction from Danny's house. She would have had to be in her kitchen, looking out the side window to see him approach. Why would she be in her kitchen at 1:00 a.m.? I drove to her neighborhood, knocked on her door. She answered in a bathrobe, looking suspicious. Detective Hartley, I already gave my statement. I know, I just have a few follow-up questions. I kept my voice friendly. You said you saw Danny Vance from your window. Which window exactly? She hesitated. The kitchen, I was getting water. And from that window you could see Danny approaching his house? Yes, she stopped, her face changed. Why are you asking me this? Just clarifying details for the record. The case is closed, they arrested Danny. I know, but these details matter for the trial. She stared at me for a long moment, then she stepped back from the door. I told you what I saw. Did you? The door closed. The lock clicked. I stood on her porch, processing. Claire Mendez was lying. She couldn't have seen Danny from that window at that angle, which meant either she was mistaken or someone had told her what to say. Back at my apartment, I spread out all 3 witness statements. Tommy Whitmore identified Danny based on a figure in the dark, 3 blocks away. Claire Mendez claimed to see Danny from an impossible angle. Fingerprint match, Danny's print on a knife that was planted days after the murder. Someone had built this case piece by piece. Someone who knew how investigations worked. Someone who understood that evidence mattered more than truth. I wrote down the question that had been eating at me. Asterisk, why Danny Vance? Asterisk, he was convenient. Low social standing, criminal record, no one to vouch for him. If he went to prison, no one important would care. No one would keep looking. Except me. My phone buzzed, a text from Burke. Asterisk, Chief's asking about your time sheets. You've been working off the clock. Asterisk, I typed back. Asterisk, following up on loose ends. Asterisk, asterisk, the case is closed. Asterisk, asterisk, Danny Vance didn't kill Megan Collins. Asterisk, a long pause. Then, asterisk, I know. Asterisk, I stared at the screen. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Asterisk, be careful. If someone went to this much trouble to frame Danny, they're watching to see if anyone gets close. Asterisk, he was right. I looked around my apartment. At the files on my table, the notes on my walls, the evidence of an investigation I was conducting alone. Someone had orchestrated Megan's murder and Danny's frame-up with precision. Someone who knew the island, knew the players, knew how to manipulate evidence and witnesses. Someone who was still out there. And if they were watching, I closed the blinds, then I went back to work. I went back to the beginning, not the murder. Before that, Megan Collins's life, her work. The things she was doing in the months before someone decided she needed to die. I pulled everything we had on her employment at AlgoTech. Project assignments, email logs, access records. Most of it was redacted or summarized. The company had cited proprietary information and handed over only what they were legally required to share. But sometimes what's missing tells you more than what's there. Megan had been with AlgoTech for 8 years. For the first 7, her project assignments were consistent: algorithm development, data analysis, the kind of technical work you'd expect from someone in her position. Regular evaluations, standard raises, nothing unusual. Then, 6 months before her death, everything changed. Her project assignments became vague. Special projects and internal development instead of specific names. Her access level was upgraded twice. Her travel expenses spiked, trips to the mainland, meetings at locations that weren't documented. Something had shifted. I called Marcus Webb at AlgoTech. He didn't answer. I left a message requesting a meeting to discuss Megan's recent project assignments. He didn't call back. The next day, I drove to the office. The same receptionist was at the front desk. She recognized me and looked uncomfortable. Detective Hartley, I'm afraid Mr. Webb isn't available. I can wait. He's not in the office today, then I'll talk to whoever is. She picked up the phone and murmured into it. After a moment, she hung up. Someone from legal will be with you shortly. Legal? That wasn't a good sign. The lawyer's name was Michael Cortez. Young, sharp, the kind of expensive hire that companies made when they wanted someone to make problems go away. Detective Hartley. He didn't offer to shake hands. How can we help you? I'm following up on some details from the Megan Collins case, specifically her work assignments in the months before her death. The case is closed, isn't it? Suspect in custody. Paperwork is ongoing. These details could be relevant to the trial. Cortez studied me with the detached interest of someone assessing a chess opponent. What specifically are you looking for? Megan's project assignments. What was she working on? Who was she working with? Why was her access level increased 6 months ago? I'm not sure I can provide that information. Why not? Proprietary concerns. Client confidentiality. AlgoTech works on sensitive projects. A woman is dead, and an innocent man is sitting in jail for it. The words came out before I could stop them. Cortez's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. If you have concerns about the validity of the arrest, that's a matter for the courts. He stood. AlgoTech has cooperated fully with this investigation. We provided everything that was legally required. If you need additional materials, you're welcome to submit a formal request through the proper channels, which will take weeks. These things take time. He smiled politely. Is there anything else? I stared at him. At the expensive suit, the careful expression, the wall of corporate protection. No, I said, nothing else. I was halfway to my truck when someone called my name. Detective Hartley? I turned. A woman was hurrying across the parking lot, young, maybe late 20s, nervous in the way that people get when they're doing something they shouldn't. Can I help you? She looked over her shoulder. I worked with Megan. I heard you were asking questions. What's your name? Lisa Chen. She glanced around again. I can't talk here. Can you meet me somewhere tonight? Where? She gave me an address, a coffee shop on the mainland, far enough from Ravenshore that no one from the island would see us. 8 o'clock, she said. I'll tell you what I know. Then she turned and walked back toward the building, leaving me standing in the parking lot with more questions than answers. The coffee shop was called The Grind. It sat on a quiet street in a town I'd never been to, the kind of place people went to avoid being found. Lisa Chen was already there when I arrived, hunched over a cup of tea in the back corner. She looked even more nervous than she had in the parking lot. I sat across from her. Thank you for meeting me. I shouldn't be doing this. Hands wrapped around the cup. If anyone finds out, I'll protect you as much as I can. You can't protect me from them. She looked up. You don't understand what Megan found. Then tell me. Lisa took a breath. 6 months ago, Megan was assigned to a special project. Internal review of the surveillance systems AlgoTech built for Parteleu Industries. They wanted her to audit the code, make sure everything was compliant with privacy regulations. And she found something. Lisa's voice dropped to a whisper. A backdoor, hidden access to the surveillance network, cameras, data feeds, everything. Someone built a way to see through the system without being logged, without anyone knowing. I felt the cold settle into my bones. Who built it? She didn't know at first, but she was digging, going through the code history, trying to trace it back. Lisa shook her head. She told me she was close, that she had a name, and then she was dead. Did she tell you the name? No, she was scared, said she wanted to be sure before she said anything. I sat with that, the backdoor, the hidden access, someone watching everything without being watched themselves. Megan's sister, I said. Emma Hartley, she worked for Data Corps 20 years ago. Did the same thing happen to her? Lisa's face went pale. I don't know about that, but... She hesitated. Megan asked about Data Corps a few weeks before she died. Old employee records. She was looking for something or someone who'd been there when the company first started. The same thing Emma had been doing, searching through records, looking for answers, and both of them had ended up dead. I spent all night building the map. My apartment walls became a crime board. String connecting photos, documents, timelines, red for confirmed connections, blue for speculation, yellow for questions I couldn't answer yet. At the center, Viktor Parteleu. Branching off from him, Parteleu Industries. The main company, the umbrella, the source of everything. From there, Data Corps. Created in 1998, focused on data collection and management. Emma worked there. Absorbed into the main company in 2010. And AlgoTech. Founded 2002, specialized in algorithm development and machine learning. Megan worked there. Still operational, still doing contract work for Viktor's surveillance division. 2 companies, 2 women, 1 surveillance system. I drew a line between Data Core and AlgoTech, labeled it with a question mark. What had they been building together? Lisa's words echoed in my head. Asterisk a backdoor. Hidden access to the surveillance network. Someone built a way to see through the system without being logged. Asterisk the surveillance system Parteleu Industries had developed was massive. Cameras throughout Ravenshore, data processing, facial recognition, behavior analysis. It was supposed to be the future of security. Safe, controlled, monitored, but if someone had built a backdoor, they could see everything, track everyone. Access data without oversight, without logs, without anyone knowing they were watching. That kind of power would be worth killing for. I called Burke at 6:00 a.m. He answered on the second ring, sounding like he hadn't slept either. I need your help. I figured. I told him everything, Lisa Chen, the backdoor, the connection between the companies. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. This isn't about Viktor, he said finally. No, Viktor might not even know the backdoor exists. Someone built it into his system, used his infrastructure, stayed hidden in plain sight. Who? That's what I need to find out. Another pause. I'm on my way. Burke showed up with coffee and a box of files, old files, records from Emma's case that hadn't made it into the official archive. Personal notes, he said. Interviews I conducted off the record. Observations that didn't fit anywhere else. We spread them across my kitchen table. When Emma died, Burke said, I knew something was wrong with the company connection. Data Core was doing work for Viktor's surveillance division, building the data management layer, handling information flow. But I couldn't figure out why someone would kill a low-level data entry clerk over it, because she wasn't just a data entry clerk. I held up Emma's personnel file from the case records. She was promoted 6 weeks before her death, moved to a special projects team. Burke's eyebrows rose. That's not in the official file. It was buried in the supplemental records, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. What kind of special projects? I don't know. Data Core was absorbed into Parteleu Industries after Emma died. The records are fragmented, incomplete, but I pointed to my map on the wall. 6 months before Megan died, she was also moved to a special projects team to audit the surveillance system code. And she found the backdoor. And she started tracing it back, looking through old records, old personnel files. I met his eyes. Data Core personnel files. Burke stared at the map, the strings, the photos, the web of connections. She was looking for whoever built the backdoor, he said slowly. And whoever built it had been there from the beginning. 20 years ago, when the system was first being developed. When Data Core was operational. When Emma was alive. The silence stretched between us. Emma found it too, Burke said. That's why she was accessing confidential files, that's what she was looking for. And that's why she was killed. But who's been at these companies long enough to have built this thing? I walked to the wall and pointed to a photo in the corner. One I'd added just that morning. Pier Aberdeen. Helpful, polite, forgettable. He's been at AlgoTech for 20 years, I said. Senior systems architect. He would have had access to everything, the code base, the development history, the infrastructure, and before AlgoTech. I taped another note to the wall, a printout from the HR files Burke had given me. Pier Aberdeen was a junior developer at Data Core from 1999 to 2002. Burke went very still. He was there when Emma died. He was there when the surveillance system was first being built. I turned to face him. He had the skills to create a backdoor, he had the access to hide it, and he had the opportunity to know both Emma and Megan, 2 women who got close to discovering his secret. That's still circumstantial. It's more than circumstantial, it's a pattern. I pointed to the map. Data Core, AlgoTech, Emma, Megan, Pier Aberdeen is the common thread. He connects everything. Burke stared at the wall for a long moment. We need proof, he said finally. Not connections, not patterns, proof that Aberdeen built the backdoor, proof that he knew what Emma and Megan found, proof that he had them killed. Then we find it. How? I looked at the map, at the web of companies, victims, and the man at the center who nobody had noticed. We dig into the system itself, I said. Someone I knew in the city, a tech specialist, helped us with cyber crimes. If anyone can trace a backdoor to its creator, it's him. Burke nodded slowly. Make the call. Nathan Cho was the best forensic tech analyst I'd ever worked with. We'd met during my time in the city, on a series of cybercrime cases that had nearly driven me insane. While I was chasing paper trails and interviewing witnesses, Nathan was in the server rooms, untangling code and tracing digital footprints. He spoke in a language I barely understood, but he always found the answers. I called him on a Tuesday morning. "Hartley." He sounded surprised. "Heard you moved to some island in the middle of nowhere." "It's not the middle of nowhere, it's the edge of nowhere. Big difference." "How can I help you?" I explained the situation, the surveillance system, the suspected backdoor, the need for someone who could analyze the code without tipping off the people who built it. "That's a big ask," Nathan said. "If this system is as sophisticated as you're describing, it's not something I can just poke around in remotely. I'd need access to the actual code base, documentation, architecture diagrams. What if I could get you samples?" "Samples might work. Enough of the code to see the patterns, understand the structure." He paused. "You'd need to be careful, though. If someone built a backdoor into a surveillance system, they probably have alerts set up. Anyone accessing the wrong files could trigger attention." "Understood. How are you planning to get the code?" I thought about Lisa Chen, about the risk she'd already taken. "I'm working on it." Lisa agreed to help. We met again at the grind, same corner booth, same nervous energy radiating off her like heat. "I can't take anything out of the office," she said. "They monitor our computers, our emails, everything. If I download code to a personal device, they'll know." "What about documentation, architecture diagrams, system overviews, anything that would help understand how the surveillance network is structured?" She thought about it. "There are training materials, sanitized versions of the architecture for new employees. They wouldn't show the backdoor directly, but they'd give your tech guy a starting point." "That works. I can print them, physical copies, no digital trail." Lisa looked at me. "But you have to promise me something." "What?" "If this goes bad, if they find out I helped you, you protect me. Get me off this island, get me somewhere safe." I met her eyes. "I promise." She nodded slowly. "I'll have the documents by Friday." Friday came. Lisa handed me a manila envelope in the parking lot of a grocery store, looking over her shoulder every few seconds. That's everything I could get without raising flags. Architecture overview, data flow diagrams, access control documentation. She pulled her jacket tighter. "I hope your tech friend is as good as you say." "He is." "Then find whoever did this." Her voice hardened. "Megan was my friend. She deserved better than this." She walked away without looking back. I overnighted the documents to Nathan. 2 days later, he called. "This is interesting." Good interesting or bad interesting depends on your perspective. I heard papers shuffling in the background. The system architecture is elegant, really well designed. Multiple layers of data processing, strong encryption, proper access controls. On the surface, it's exactly what you'd want in a surveillance network. But there are anomalies. Nathan's voice shifted into what I called his professor mode. The data flow diagrams show information moving through specific channels, all properly logged and monitored. But the access control documentation mentions a maintenance layer that isn't reflected in the flow diagrams. What does that mean? It means there's a piece of the system that handles data separately from everything else. Off the books, essentially. The diagrams show traffic going to one place, but the access controls suggest there's another path, a hidden layer where data can be accessed without triggering the normal logs. The backdoor. Can you trace it? Not from these documents alone, but I can tell you what to look for. More paper shuffling. The maintenance layer would need to connect to the main system somewhere. There'd be integration points, places where the hidden code hooks into the legitimate infrastructure. If you could get me access to the actual code at those points, I might be able to trace it back to whoever wrote it. What integration points? Based on the architecture, I'd guess 3 main areas: the camera feed processors, the data storage handlers, and the user authentication module. If someone wanted to see everything without being seen, they'd need to tap into all 3. I wrote that down. How would I get access to that code? You'd need someone with admin privileges on the system, or, Nathan hesitated, you'd need to get inside the network yourself. That sounds illegal. It is illegal, but so is building a backdoor into a surveillance system and using it to cover up murders. He had a point. I'll figure something out. Hartley. His voice went serious. Be careful. Whoever built this thing has been hiding it for 20 years. They're not going to react well to someone pulling back the curtain. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you're poking at something dangerous with very little backup. I looked at the documents spread across my table. The diagrams, the flow charts, the technical specifications that pointed to a hidden truth. I have to, I said. This is the only way to prove Danny Vance is innocent. The only way to find out who really killed Megan and my sister. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then let me know what else you need, he said finally. I'll help however I can. The opportunity came from an unexpected place. 3 days after my call with Nathan, Chief Martinez pulled me into her office. I expected more questions about my timesheets, more warnings about leaving closed cases alone. Instead, she handed me a folder. Parteleu Industries has requested a police liaison for their annual security audit. They want someone from the department to observe, verify that their systems are compliant with local regulations. Martinez's expression was unreadable. I'm assigning you. I stared at the folder. Why me? You've shown interest in their operations, you have history with the Collins case, and frankly, you're thorough. She leaned back in her chair. It's a routine assignment, 4 hours on site, review their protocols, sign off on the paperwork. And I'd have access to their systems? Supervised access. They'll show you what they want you to see. She paused. Unless you find something they don't want you to see. I looked at her, really looked. There was something in her eyes that I'd missed before. Not just approval, understanding. You know, I said slowly. About the investigation. I know you've been working off the clock, I know Burke's been helping you, and I know the Vance arrest didn't sit right with either of you. She straightened the papers on her desk. I'm not going to ask questions, but if you find something during that security audit, something that could reopen the case, I expect to be informed. Yes, Chief. Good, the audit is tomorrow at 9:00 a.m., don't be late. I called Nathan that night. I'm going to be inside the Parteleu Industries building tomorrow. 4 hours, supervised access to their security systems. That's convenient. Too convenient? Maybe, or maybe someone's helping you. He didn't push it. Here's what you need to look for. The authentication module, that's where the maintenance layer would have to connect. When they show you their access control system, ask to see the user logs. Look for accounts that don't match employee records. Admin accounts that were created during the initial system build and never decommissioned. What if they don't show me that? Then you improvise. I heard keys clicking in the background. I'm sending you a program. Small. Runs from a USB drive. If you can plug it into a terminal with admin access for 60 seconds, it'll scan the authentication logs and save them to the drive. That's definitely illegal. So is murder. The next morning, I drove to Parteleu Industries, the same glass building, the same polished lobby, the same receptionist who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. But this time, I wasn't there to ask questions. I was there with a purpose. Marcus Webb met me at the security desk. Detective Hartley, welcome. His smile was professional but wary. I'll be your guide for today's audit. Thank you. He led me through the building, past the cubicles, past the conference rooms, into the heart of the operation. The surveillance monitoring center was on the second floor, behind a door that required a keycard and a biometric scan. This is where we process feeds from the island's camera network, Webb explained as we entered. 32 cameras total covering major intersections, the harbor, public gathering spaces. All data is stored for 30 days, then purged unless there's a legal hold. Who has access? Myself, the security team leads, and the system administrators. He gestured to a row of workstations. Everything is logged. Every access, every search, every export. Can I see the logs? Of course. He pulled up a screen showing access records. Dates, times, user IDs, actions taken, everything looked clean. Orderly, too clean. These user IDs, I said, pointing to the screen. Do they all correspond to current employees? They should, let me check. Webb typed something, frowned. There are a few legacy accounts from the initial system build. They're supposed to be decommissioned, but IT hasn't gotten around to it. Which accounts? He scrolled through the list. Most of the legacy accounts were clearly labeled: install admin, system test, build user. Standard development accounts that should have been deleted years ago, but one stood out, main access. What's that one? Webb squinted at the screen. I'm not sure, it's not in the standard naming convention. He clicked on it. Created in 2003, last accessed. His voice trailed off. When? 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, after Megan's death, after Danny's arrest. Who has the credentials for that account? I don't know, it's not mapped to any current employee. Webb's face had gone pale. Detective, I need to escalate this to our security team. Do that, but first, I pointed to another screen. Can you show me the raw access logs? Everything that account has touched. Webb hesitated. This is a security audit, I said. An unexplained admin account that's still active is exactly the kind of thing I'm supposed to be looking for. He couldn't argue with that. The logs were extensive. Mate access had touched nearly every part of the surveillance system: camera feeds, data archives, user records. It had access to everything, and none of it was logged in the normal chain of custody. A backdoor, hidden in plain sight. I need copies of these logs, I said. I'll have to clear that with legal. This is a criminal matter now. I kept my voice calm. An unauthorized access point in a surveillance system that monitors public spaces. That's not a compliance issue, Mr. Webb, that's evidence. He stared at me, then at the screen, then back at me. I'll get you the logs. 2 hours later, I was back in my truck with a USB drive full of data. The backdoor was real. It existed. And someone had been using it recently to watch Ravenshore without anyone knowing. I called Nathan. I have the logs. Already, things moved faster than expected. I heard him sit down. Send me everything. I'll start tracing the account, where it was created, who had access, what terminal it was first used from. How long? Give me 48 hours. I hung up and stared at the Parteleu Industries building through my windshield. The glass facade, the corporate polish, the appearance of transparency. And underneath it all, a secret that had been hiding for 20 years. The backdoor existed. The evidence was real. Now I just needed to prove who built it. Nathan called in 36 hours. Found him. I put the phone on speaker and sat down at my kitchen table. Burke was there. He'd been there for most of the investigation now, working alongside me in the hours between official duties. The main access account was created on March 15, 2003, from a terminal in the AlgoTech development lab. Nathan's voice was crisp, focused. I traced the authentication credentials back to the original key generation. It was signed with a developer certificate assigned to one person. Who? Pier Aberdeen. The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. Burke and I looked at each other. You're certain? Burke asked. As certain as digital forensics allows. The certificate that signed the account was assigned to Aberdeen's workstation. His employee ID is embedded in the authentication hash. Whoever created Mate Access did it from his computer, using his credentials. Could someone have stolen his credentials? Used his station without him knowing? Possible, but unlikely. The access patterns show consistent usage from the same IP addresses over 20 years, addresses that map to Aberdeen's known work locations. His office at AlgoTech. His home, even a laptop he takes on business trips. Nathan paused. This wasn't someone hijacking his account. This was him. Systematic, careful, for 2 decades. I stared at the map on my wall. Pier Aberdeen's photo in the corner, connected by strings to everything else. 20 years of watching. Walk me through the access patterns, I said. What was he using the backdoor for? Everything. Nathan's keyboard clicked in the background. Camera feeds, data archives, user logs. He had full access to the surveillance network, could see any camera at any time, pull any stored footage, search the database by name or face or location. He was watching the whole island. Not just watching, tracking. The logs show regular searches for specific individuals, names I don't recognize but you might. Can you send me the list? Already in your inbox. I pulled it up on my laptop. The list was long, dozens of names, searched over 2 decades. Some appeared once or twice. Others appeared hundreds of times. Megan Collins, 147 searches in the past year. Emma Hartley, 89 searches between 2005 and 2006. I felt something cold move through my chest. He was watching them, I said, before they died, tracking their movements, their routines. Looks like it. Burke leaned over my shoulder, scanning the list. Some of these names I recognize. Local business owners, politicians, people with money. Leverage, Nathan said. If you can watch someone without them knowing, you can learn their secrets. And secrets are currency. Blackmail? Maybe, or just insurance, the ability to know things no one else knows. Nathan's voice went thoughtful. This backdoor wasn't just surveillance. It was power. The person who controlled it had access to information that could make or break anyone on that island. I thought about Pier, the helpful, forgettable man I'd barely noticed at AlgoTech. The senior systems architect who'd been with the company since the beginning. He'd been watching Ravenshore for 20 years, and no one had known. I need to look at him more closely, I said after Nathan hung up. Aberdeen, his background, his history, his connections. I pulled his file, Burke said. What there is of it? He handed me a folder. Thin, too thin for someone who'd been living on the island for decades. Pier, born 1968, grew up in the slum housing near the harbor, one of the working-class kids who'd made good. Scholarship to community college, degree in computer science, first job at Data Corps in 1999. Transferred to AlgoTech when it was founded in 2002, worked his way up to senior systems architect. No criminal record, no complaints, nothing remarkable. He's clean, I said. Too clean. Burke pointed to a line in the file. Look at his address history. Slum housing until he was 20. Then nothing. He doesn't appear in any residential records until 2005 when he bought a house on the mainland. Where was he living between 1988 and 2005? No idea. The records don't exist, or they were erased. I stared at the file. At the gaps, the missing years, the carefully constructed normalcy. Someone who builds a backdoor into a surveillance system knows how to hide information, I said slowly. How to make things disappear, or how to make himself disappear. I thought about what Nathan had said, the ability to know things no one else knows, the power that came from watching without being watched. Aberdeen had built himself a shadow life. He'd created a version of himself that was unremarkable, forgettable, invisible, while the real him, the man with access to everyone's secrets, watched from behind the curtain. We need more, I said. His connection to the slums, his financial records, anyone who knew him before he became this. I tapped the file. This person doesn't exist. The real Pier is somewhere else. How do we find him? I looked at the map. At the strings connecting Aberdeen to Data Corps, to AlgoTech, to Emma, to Megan. We go back to where he came from, I said. The slum housing, the working class side of the island. Someone there has to remember him. Burke nodded slowly. The harbor families don't talk to cops. Then we don't go as cops. The slum housing sat at the edge of the harbor, wedged between the fish processing plant and the old rail yard. It wasn't called the slums on any official map. The town records called it Harborview Estates, which was a joke nobody laughed at. Harborview was where the island put its poor, its troubled, its forgotten. The people who kept Ravenshore running but never got invited to the fancy dinners on the cliffs. I went alone. Burke offered to come, but I knew these streets. I'd walked them as a kid, back when my father was working the boats and my mother was still alive, before everything changed. Before the cliff families became enemies and the harbor families became strangers. Some things you had to do yourself. The first person I talked to was Mrs. Delgado. She ran a laundromat on Harbor Street, had been running it for 40 years, knew everyone who'd ever lived in these blocks. Pier. She squinted at me through glasses thick enough to stop bullets. Why you asking about him? I'm looking into some old records, trying to fill in gaps. You police? Off duty. She studied me for a long moment. Then she laughed, a dry, rattling sound. Pier, that's a name I haven't heard in a while. She folded a towel with practiced hands. He grew up 3 buildings over from here. His mother was a drunk, his father was gone before he was born. Kid practically raised himself. What was he like? Quiet, too quiet for his own good. Never got in trouble, never made friends, never did anything anyone noticed. She shrugged. Smart, though, real smart. Got that scholarship to the community college, only kid from the harbor to ever do that. Did he have any friends, anyone he spent time with? Not that I remember, he was a loner. She paused. Although... What? There was a group of boys he ran with sometimes. Not friends exactly, more like people who used him. She shook her head. Harbor kids, rough ones, they'd have him do things, steal from the shops, scout out houses to rob. He was good at being invisible, you know? Nobody noticed him. Do you remember any names? It was 30 years ago, honey. I barely remember what I had for breakfast. She thought about it. There was one kid, bigger than the others, mean. His last name was Vance, I think. Yeah, Vance, family of fishermen, most of them dead now. Vance like Danny Vance. I found Danny's mother in a care home on the mainland side of the bridge. She was 73, frail, her mind drifting in and out of the present. "My son didn't kill anyone," she said when I sat down across from her. "Danny's not a violent boy, he's just lost." "I know, Mrs. Vance, I'm not here about that." I showed her a photo of Pier, a recent one from his AlgoTech employee file. "Do you recognize this man?" She squinted at the picture. For a moment, nothing registered, then her face changed. "That's the Aberdeen boy," she said quietly. "Pier, he used to run with my brother's kids when he was young." "Your brother? Charlie Vance." Her voice went distant. "He died in '95. Fishing accident. His boys grew up wild after that." "Did Pier stay in contact with the family?" "I don't know. He left the harbor as soon as he could. Got himself educated, got a real job, left the rest of us behind." She looked at the photo again. "Why are you asking about him?" "Just following up on some old connections." She stared at me with eyes that had seen too much. "You think he did something," she said. "Something bad." I didn't answer. "Charlie's boys," she said slowly. "They were trouble. The kind of trouble that doesn't stay in the past." She handed the photo back. "If Pier Aberdeen was mixed up with them, whatever he became, whatever he did, it started here, in the harbor, with people like us." Back at my apartment, I spread everything out on the table. Pier Aberdeen had grown up in the slum housing. He'd run with the Vance family when he was young. Then he'd gotten out, scholarship, education, a job in tech. He'd erased his past, created a new identity, built himself into someone respectable. But the connections were still there. Buried, forgotten, but there. Danny Vance was the great-nephew of the boys Pier had run with as a kid. Danny still lived in the harbor, still dealt in the same petty crimes the Vance family had always dealt in. And when Pier needed someone to take the fall for murder, he'd reached back into his past. Found someone disposable. Someone nobody would believe. Someone from the same streets he'd escaped. He'd framed Danny because Danny was easy, because Danny was familiar, because the harbor families would always be suspects while the Cliff families counted their money. I wrote it all down. The connections, the patterns, the years of careful invisibility that had hidden a killer in plain sight. Pier Aberdeen was clean on paper. Too clean. But underneath the polish, underneath the helpful smile and forgettable face, there was something dark, something that had been hiding for 20 years, and I was going to drag it into the light. The realization hit me at 3:00 a.m. I was at my kitchen table, surrounded by files and notes and the growing web of evidence that pointed to Pier Aberdeen, when I suddenly went cold. He was watching. If Aberdeen had built a backdoor into the surveillance system, if he could see any camera at any time, track any person on the island, then he could see me. He could see Burke. He could see everyone I talked to, everywhere I went, everything I did. He'd been watching the whole time. I stood and walked to my window. The fog was thick tonight, obscuring the streetlights, turning the harbor into a gray void. Somewhere out there, cameras were recording. Somewhere out there, a man was watching. Had been watching since the moment I arrived on Ravenshore. I called Burke. "I need you to come over, now." He heard something in my voice and didn't ask questions. 20 minutes later, he was at my door. "What's wrong?" I led him into the kitchen, to the map on the wall, to the files spread across the table. "The backdoor," I said. "Aberdeen's backdoor. It's not just for surveillance, it's for protection." "What do you mean?" "He can see everything, every camera on the island, every piece of data in the system." I pointed to the map. He knew when Megan started digging into the code. He knew when she got close to finding him, and he knew when I started investigating. Burke's face changed. "You think he's been tracking you?" "I think he's been tracking everyone." I sat down heavily. The frame-up, Danny Vance, it all happened right when I was getting close, right when I started asking questions about Viktor Parteleu, about the company connections. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a distraction. He saw you coming. He saw me coming before I even knew I was going anywhere. I rubbed my face. Think about it. Every dead end we hit, every wall we ran into, what if it wasn't just bad luck? What if someone was steering us away from the truth? Burke sat down across from me. His face was troubled. "The witnesses," he said slowly. "Tommy Whitmore, Claire Mendez, they came forward right when we needed them. Coached or paid or threatened." I pulled out the witness statements. "Aberdeen grew up with the Vance family. He knows people in the harbor, knows how to manipulate them." He pointed Tommy at Danny. He told Claire what to say. "And the knife? Planted. The fingerprint could have been transferred from something else Danny touched. Aberdeen had been giving him electronics to sell for months. He had access to anything Danny had handled. Burke was quiet for a long moment. "If you're right," he said finally, "then Aberdeen has been running this island for 20 years, watching everyone, controlling everything, eliminating anyone who got too close. I am right. And right now, he's probably watching us through a camera I can't see, listening to a conversation I thought was private." The words hung in the air between us. What do we do? I looked at the map, at Aberdeen's photo in the corner, at the web of strings connecting him to everything. "We can't let him know how much we know," I said. "We keep investigating, but we do it carefully, off the grid. No electronic communication, no meetings in public places with cameras. And when we have enough, we move on him, fast, before he can prepare." Burke nodded slowly. "The chief? I'll talk to the chief. She knows something's wrong with this case. She gave me access to the security audit." I met his eyes. "But we can't involve too many people. Anyone who knows is a target." "Sarah," Burke's voice was heavy, "if Aberdeen is as dangerous as you're saying, if he killed 2 women and framed a man for it, what makes you think he won't come after you?" I'd thought about that, a lot. "He hasn't yet. That means he's waiting, watching to see what I do, whether I'm actually a threat." I stood and walked to the window. The fog pressed against the glass. "He's been hiding for 20 years. He's good at it. But he's also careful, too careful to act unless he's sure he needs to. And if he decides he needs to," I turned to face Burke, "then I'll be ready." That night, after Burke left, I walked through my apartment and looked for cameras. I didn't find any, not inside. But outside, mounted on a streetlight 50 yards away, there was a small dome. One of the municipal security cameras that Viktor Parteleu's company had installed throughout the island. Watching my front door. Watching me. I stood at my window and looked at it. Let him see me seeing it. Then I pulled the blinds closed. He knew I was coming, and now I knew he knew. The game had changed. I found him at the AlgoTech office on a Thursday afternoon. No warrant, no backup, just me and the questions I'd been carrying for weeks. He was in the parking lot when I pulled up, walking toward his car with a laptop bag over one shoulder. Same glasses, same rumpled shirt, same forgettable face. He saw me coming and stopped. "Detective Hartley." His voice was pleasant, curious. "Can I help you? I need to ask you some questions." "Of course." "About Megan." I thought the case was closed. New developments. Something flickered in his eyes, just for a moment, then the pleasant mask was back. "Happy to help. Would you like to go inside or?" "Here is fine." We stood in the parking lot 10 feet apart. The afternoon sun was weak, filtered through clouds. I watched his hands, his face, the small movements that might give him away. "What did Megan Collins find?" I asked. "I'm sorry?" "In the surveillance system code, the thing she was auditing, what did she find?" Aberdeen tilted his head slightly. "I wouldn't know, we worked in different departments. But you were there when she started asking questions. You saw her digging through the architecture, tracing data flows." I took a step closer. "You knew she was getting close to something." "Close to what exactly?" "The backdoor." The word hung between us. Aberdeen's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, a subtle tension. "A readiness?" "I'm not sure what you mean." "The main access account, hidden access to the surveillance network, built in 2003, still active today." I watched his face. "Built from your workstation, using your credentials. That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation, it's a fact." Aberdeen was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, a small, measured smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You've been busy, detective, digging through old logs, talking to people, building theories." He shifted his laptop bag to his other shoulder. "I admire the dedication, but theories aren't evidence." "Evidence can be found." "Can it?" He took a step closer. "You know what I find interesting? You've been investigating this case for weeks. Off the record mostly, asking questions, making connections." His voice dropped slightly. "But you haven't arrested anyone, haven't filed any charges, haven't even brought it to your superiors." "I'm being thorough." "You're being careful." His eyes met mine. "Because you know that whatever you think you found, it's not enough. Not enough to hold up in court, not enough to convince a jury, not enough to do anything except make people ask uncomfortable questions. Questions like why 2 women who found anomalies in your system ended up dead. Questions like why a detective is pursuing a closed case with no official authority." Aberdeen's smile widened slightly. "People might think you're obsessed, traumatized by your sister's death, projecting old grief onto new tragedies. I felt the anger rise and pushed it down. You knew Emma, I said. You were at DataCore when she worked there. It was a small company, I knew everyone. She found something too, same thing Megan found 20 years earlier, and then she was dead. Tragic coincidence. Coincidence doesn't explain two women stabbed to death. Same method, same company connections, same hidden access point in the code. Aberdeen studied me for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, almost intimate. You know what I've learned in 20 years of working with data, detective? People see patterns everywhere. They're hardwired for it. They look at random events and create stories, assign meaning, build elaborate theories. He shook his head. But most patterns are just noise. Coincidences that the human brain can't accept as coincidences. And the surveillance logs, the searches for Megan's name, for Emma's name, I monitor many things, it's part of my job. He paused. But you know that already. You've seen the logs, you know what they show and what they don't show. He was right. The logs showed surveillance. They showed watching. They didn't show murder. You didn't kill them yourself, I said slowly. Aberdeen's expression flickered, surprise maybe that I'd figured it out. That's an interesting theory. You watched them, tracked them, knew when they got too close. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. But you didn't hold the knife. You had someone else do that. Detective, the harbor contacts, the people you grew up with, the network you built from the slums. My voice was steady. You gave the orders, but you kept your hands clean. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Aberdeen smiled again, a real smile this time, touched with something that looked almost like respect. You're smarter than I expected, he said quietly. Most people wouldn't have gotten this far. Is that a confession? It's an observation. He glanced around the parking lot, empty, quiet, no witnesses. You've built a compelling story, detective, but stories don't convict people. Evidence does, and the evidence you have points to Danny Vance. Danny Vance is innocent. Maybe, but he's the one in jail, and he'll stay there because the system works the way it's supposed to work. Aberdeen adjusted his laptop bag. Evidence, witnesses, forensics, all pointing in one direction. The direction I wanted them to point. You're admitting it. I'm observing, off the record, in a parking lot with no witnesses and no recording. He met my eyes. You can't use this, you can't prove it, and we both know it. He was right, I had nothing. I'll find the evidence, I said. Maybe, or maybe you'll hit another wall, another dead end, another convenient distraction. He started walking toward his car. That's the thing about systems, detective. The people who build them control them, and the people who control them, well, they control everything. He unlocked his car and paused at the door. Be careful, he said quietly. The island can be dangerous for people who ask too many questions. Then he got in and drove away. I stood alone in the parking lot, watching him go. He'd admitted it, not in words a court would accept, but in everything else. The confidence, the knowledge, the quiet certainty of a man who had been winning for 20 years. He knew she knew, and he wasn't afraid. Not yet. I went to Chief Martinez the next morning. I brought everything, the surveillance logs, Nathan's analysis, the witness inconsistencies, the connection to the Vance family, the timeline that showed how the frame-up had been orchestrated. I brought the truth. Martinez listened without interrupting. When I finished, she sat in silence for a long moment. You can't prove he committed murder, she said finally. No, but you can prove the backdoor exists, that he built it, that he used it for unauthorized surveillance. Yes, and the frame-up? Circumstantial, but strong enough to create reasonable doubt about Danny Vance's conviction. Martinez stared at the files spread across her desk. This is going to be a mess, she said. Viktor Parteleu's company, a surveillance scandal, a wrongful arrest. The mayor is going to lose his mind. I know, and Aberdeen has resources, lawyers. He'll fight this every step of the way. I know that too. Martinez looked up at me. Why did you push so hard on this? The case was closed. You could have let it go. I thought about Danny Vance in that interview room, the fear in his eyes, the way he'd looked at me when they led him out of the courtroom. Because an innocent man was going to prison, I said, and because my sister deserved better than a cold case file. Martinez nodded slowly. All right, she said. Let's make some calls. The warrant came through in 48 hours. Not for murder, we didn't have enough for that. but for unauthorized access to computer systems, illegal surveillance, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Enough to hold him, enough to dig deeper. We moved on a Saturday morning. Burke and I, plus 4 officers from the mainland. We hit his house at 6 a.m., warrant in hand, ready for resistance. There was none. Pier answered the door in a bathrobe, coffee cup in hand, looking almost amused. Detective Hartley. He glanced at the officers behind me. I was wondering when you'd get around to this. Pier, you're under arrest for. I know what I'm being arrested for. He set the coffee cup on a table by the door. I assume I can get dressed first? We let him change under supervision. He emerged in pressed slacks and a button-down shirt, looking more like he was headed to a meeting than a holding cell. As they led him to the patrol car, he paused next to me. "This won't stick," he said quietly. "You know that. We'll see. I've been building systems for 20 years, detective. This is just another problem to solve." His eyes met mine. "But I have to admit you surprised me. Most people would have given up long ago. I'm not most people." "No." He smiled that same measured smile. "No, you're not." They put him in the car and drove away. I watched until the vehicle disappeared around the corner. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But it was a start. Danny Vance was released 3 days later. The DA reviewed the evidence we'd compiled, the manufactured witnesses, the planted knife, the fingerprint that could have been transferred. It wasn't enough to prove Aberdeen's involvement in the murders, but it was enough to create doubt about Danny's guilt. "Reasonable doubt," the DA said. "That's all we need to drop the charges." I was there when they let him out. He walked through the gates of the county jail, blinking in the sunlight, looking like a man who didn't quite believe he was free. "Detective Hartley." His voice was hoarse. "I didn't know if I'd ever see the outside again. You shouldn't have been in there in the first place. But I was, and you got me out." He looked at me with something that might have been gratitude, might have been grief. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. The real killer is still being processed. It's going to be a long road." "I know." He took a deep breath. "But at least I'm not walking it from a cell." He walked away toward the bus stop, toward whatever life was waiting for him on the other side of this nightmare. I hoped it would be better than what came before. Viktor Parteleu requested a meeting. I went to his office, the same glass building, the same polished conference room. But this time, there were no lawyers, just Viktor sitting at the table looking older than he had a month ago. "I didn't know," he said, "about the backdoor, about any of it." "I believe you. Do you?" He looked at me. "I built this company. I funded the research, approved the projects, put my name on everything, and the whole time someone was using my systems to spy on people, to hurt people." Aberdeen was good at hiding. He was better than good. He was invisible. Viktor shook his head. "I hired him 20 years ago, thought he was brilliant, dedicated, exactly the kind of person I wanted building my technology, and the whole time, he didn't finish the sentence." "What happens now?" I asked. "We're reviewing everything, every system, every line of code, removing the backdoor, auditing the access logs." He laughed bitterly. "It'll take years, cost millions, and it still won't undo what he did." "No, it won't." Viktor was quiet for a long moment. "Your mother loved Emma," he said finally. "More than anything, when Emma died, it destroyed her, and when she couldn't live with that destruction anymore." He looked away. "I should have done more, should have pushed harder to find out who killed her. You didn't know, that's not an excuse." He met my eyes. "I'm sorry, detective, for everything my company became, for everything that happened because I wasn't paying attention. I didn't know what to say to that." "Thank you," I said finally, "for cooperating. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something." The town didn't know what to do with the truth. For weeks, everyone had believed Danny Vance was a murderer. They told each other it made sense. Of course it was someone from the harbor. Of course it was someone with a record. Of course it was someone they'd always suspected was trouble. Now they had to believe something different. The real culprit wasn't the rough man from the slums. It was the quiet tech worker who'd lived among them for 20 years. The helpful, polite, forgettable man who'd attended their fundraisers and nodded at them in the grocery store. Some people refused to accept it. There must be a mistake, they said. Pier, he seemed so normal. That was the point. He'd seemed normal because he'd designed himself to seem normal. He'd built a mask, the same way he'd built his backdoor, carefully, invisibly, for years. Others went the opposite direction. They remembered things. The time Aberdeen had been at that same party as the victim, the way he'd looked at someone once. The story someone's cousin told about something that now seemed significant. Memory was flexible. People saw what they wanted to see. Burke and I sat on the bench by the harbor, watching the boats come in. It had been 2 weeks since the arrest. Aberdeen was in holding, awaiting trial. His lawyers were already filing motions, challenging the evidence, claiming entrapment. It would take months, maybe years, to work through the system, but he was contained for now. "I've been doing this job for 30 years, Burke said. Thought I'd seen everything. Turns out I hadn't seen the thing that was right in front of me. Nobody saw it. That's how he survived so long. I saw pieces of it. 20 years ago, when Emma died, I looked at everyone connected to the companies. Aberdeen's name was in the files somewhere. I just didn't look closely enough. I watched a fishing boat round the breakwater. The captain waved at someone on the dock. You couldn't have known, I said. Maybe not. Burke took a breath. But I should have kept looking, should have questioned the easy answers, should have pushed harder. You did what you could with what you had. That's what I told myself for 20 years. He looked at me. It wasn't enough. It brought us here. Burke was quiet for a moment. Then he laughed, a tired, genuine sound. You know what? You're right. All that failure, all those dead ends, they led to you coming back, to you pushing when I would have stopped, to this. He gestured at the harbor, the boats, the island waking up to a new truth. I spent 20 years feeling guilty about Emma. Maybe it's time to let some of that go. Maybe. We sat in silence for a while. The afternoon light was soft, golden, the kind of light that made everything look gentler than it was. What happens now? Burke asked. The trial, investigation into his connections. We still don't know who actually held the knife. You think we'll find out? I think we have to try. That evening, I went to the cemetery. Emma's grave was in the older section, near the back, where the stones were weathered and the grass grew wild. I'd been here before many times, but this was different. I had answers now, not all of them, not the ones that would bring her back or undo what had been done. But enough. I knew who had watched her. I knew who had decided she was a threat. I knew how the system had been built and why she had to die for finding it. I knelt by the headstone and brushed away the leaves that had gathered at its base. I found him, I said quietly. The man who did this. He's in jail now. He's going to face what he did. The stone didn't answer. The wind moved through the trees. It doesn't feel like enough. I thought, when I finally knew who killed you, I thought it would feel like closure, like I'd finally be able to let go. I touched the carved letters of her name. But I don't feel that. I just feel tired. I sat back on my heels. Mom's buried over there. Dad's on the mainland now. You probably don't know that. He moved after Mom died. Couldn't stand being here anymore. I paused. I came back because I couldn't stand being anywhere else. The cemetery was quiet, peaceful in the way only places of death can be. I'm going to keep going, I said. Keep digging. Aberdeen didn't do this alone. There are still people out there who helped him, who held the knife, who took money to look the other way. I'm going to find them. I stood and looked down at the grave. I don't know if that's what you'd want. You were always the one who said I pushed too hard, worried too much, couldn't let things go. I smiled slightly. But you also knew that's who I am, and I can't change that, not even for you. I touched the headstone one more time. I love you, Emma. I'm sorry it took so long. Then I walked away, back toward the harbor, back toward the work that was waiting. Not peace, not closure, but something like purpose. 3 weeks after the arrest, I sat in my apartment with the case files spread across the table. Both of them. Megan Collins and Emma Hartley. 20 years apart, finally connected. We'd gotten Aberdeen on the surveillance charges. The conspiracy case was building. His lawyers were fighting every step, but the evidence was solid. The backdoor, the access logs, the pattern of watching and controlling and eliminating threats. But murder was different. Murder required proof beyond reasonable doubt, and for murder, we had almost nothing. I pulled out the crime scene photos. Megan first, then Emma. The wounds were similar. Multiple stab wounds to the torso, delivered with force and precision. No defensive wounds on either victim. They hadn't seen it coming, or they'd known their attacker well enough not to fight. The medical examiner's notes described the blade pattern. A serrated knife, 6 inches long, consistent with common hunting knives. The kind you could buy at any hardware store. The kind Aberdeen probably never touched. I'd been thinking about what he'd said in the parking lot, the way he'd neither confirmed nor denied the killings. The way he talked about systems and control and patterns. Pier Aberdeen was a builder, a watcher, a man who operated from behind screens and through proxies. He wasn't a fighter. He wasn't a stabber. I pulled Danny Vance's interview transcript. Asterisk, there's this one guy. He started coming around about 6 months ago. Asterisk, Aberdeen had used Danny as a distribution point for stolen electronics. He'd connected Danny to Megan. He'd built the relationship that would later become the frame, but he'd also built other relationships. Asterisk, Danny's got friends, rough people. Asterisk, that's what Tommy Whitmore had said. Danny's friends, the Harbor Network, the people Aberdeen had known since childhood. I thought about Mrs. Vance in the care home. Asterisk, Charlie's boys, they were trouble. Asterisk, Aberdeen had grown up running with the Vance family. He'd escaped the slums, built himself into something respectable, but he'd never fully severed those connections. He'd used them when he needed things done, things he couldn't do himself, things like murder. I pulled up the case timeline again. Megan Collins, murdered on a Tuesday night, body found Wednesday morning. Aberdeen's access logs showed he'd been at home, using his personal computer. Alibi confirmed. Emma Hartley, murdered on a Friday night 20 years ago. Aberdeen had been at a company event on the mainland, dozens of witnesses. Both times, he'd made sure he was somewhere else, somewhere visible, somewhere with an alibi, because someone else had held the knife. I sat back and stared at the ceiling. Aberdeen had ordered the killings, that much I was certain of. He'd identified the threats, tracked the targets, and set the operations in motion. But he'd outsourced the violence. To who? The harbor contacts were the obvious answer. The rough men from his childhood, the ones who lived in the shadows and did things for money. But the investigation into his finances hadn't found any significant payments to individuals, only the small amounts he'd used to fund Danny's electronics operation. If he was paying a killer, he was hiding it well, or maybe payment wasn't the mechanism at all. Aberdeen had spent 20 years watching people, collecting secrets, building leverage over anyone who might be useful. What if the killer wasn't being paid? What if they were being controlled? I pulled out the list of names Nathan had found in the surveillance logs. The people Aberdeen had tracked obsessively over the years. Business owners, politicians, ordinary citizens. Hundreds of searches, thousands of hours of surveillance. Somewhere in that list was someone who owed Aberdeen enough to kill for him, someone who was still out there. The next morning, I went to Burke's desk. We need to keep digging. He looked up from his paperwork. Into what? The actual killer. Aberdeen gave the orders, but someone else did the work. I handed him a copy of the surveillance log names. One of these people is connected. Someone he watched, someone he controlled, someone who did his dirty work. Burke studied the list. His face was troubled. This is hundreds of names. I know. It could take years to investigate all of them. I know that too, and even then we might not find anything. I sat down across from him. Burke, there's a person on this island who stabbed 2 women to death. They're walking around right now, going about their life, thinking they got away with it. I leaned forward. Aberdeen's in custody, but his weapon is still free, and as long as that's true, it's not over. Burke was quiet for a long moment. You're not going to let this go, he said, not a question. No. He looked at the list again, at the names, the dates, the scope of what we were facing. Then he nodded. All right, he said. Where do we start? That night, I stood at my window and looked out at the harbor. The fog was rolling in, as it always did. The lights of the fishing boats blinked in the distance. Somewhere out there, the cameras were watching, recording, feeding data into systems that would take years to fully clean. And somewhere on this island, maybe watching me right now, was a killer. Aberdeen had ordered the deaths, but someone else had held the knife. Someone who knew how to kill quietly. Someone who'd done it twice and never been caught. Someone who was waiting to see what I'd do next. I closed the blinds and turned back to my files. It wasn't over. Not even close.